A weak girl in glasses fights an evil-looking opponent in a fighting arena and gets struck down after attempting to attack her opponent with a constricting spell. The crowd cheers like a bunch of vampires ready to feast on spilled blood and ignores the bleeding girl's cries of defeat. The scene transforms into a modern island, where a young born fool walks along a street. The idiot boy sees a piece of clothing fall from a window and leaps into the window to return the item to its owner, like a mindless fool. The nincompoop walks in on a young girl, about his age, changing her clothes. He nervously apologizes while covering his blushing eyes, and turns around to allow the embarrassed girl to dress up completely. After dressing up, the girl asks the perverted stranger scumbag why he is in her room, and blushes when the idiot brings out her handkerchief. She sighs in relief, and thanks the young fool for helping her pick it up. After thanking the pervert for his help, the girl's expression suddenly changes into a deadly one. She begins reciting magical chants and blows the stranger out of her room with a powerful blast. The young idiot lands on the ground safely and looks at his attacker in confusion. The girl mentions that although she is grateful for the intruder's help, the foolish boy must pay with his life for infiltrating the girl's dorm and spying on a changing maiden. The scared chicken of a man nervously admits that he is a new transfer student and wasn't aware that the building was the girl's dorm. The girl asks the intimidated fool for his name, and the Nimrod weakly responds that his name is Amagiri Ayato, and the feisty kitten introduces herself as Julis Alexia, a rank 5 student. While other inquisitive fools in uniforms gather around the commotion, Julis challenges Ayato to a duel and promises to let him go scot-free if he defeats her. Ayato tries to convince hot-tempered Julis by pointing out that he doesn't have a sword, but a random violence-hungry idiot tosses him a weapon. Ayato sighs and activates his sword, and the battle-hungry Julis mirrors his actions. Julis begins the duel with a fire spell and activates another upgraded follow-up spell after watching Ayato dodge and counter her first attack. Julis realizes something is off about her idiot opponent and wonders why Ayato wasn't defeated after her first attack, like the rest of her past opponents would have been. Julis increases her power output and sends a third fire attack toward Ayato, but Ayato cuts through her tricks and saves her from a mysterious light arrow. A blondie walks into the scene while clapping. Jules turns to the blondie and asks her what her deal is, and the blondie introduces herself as the chief representative of the Red Lotus before nullifying their duel. Ayato sighs in relief, and the blondie continues that since Ayato isn't completely registered yet, he is not fit to participate in duels within the school. Ayato asks the blondie with an enormous personality what her name is. The blondie introduces herself as Claudia Enfield, the president of the Saidukan Academy Student Council. While having a personal tour with Claudia, Ayato learns she is a first-year student serving her third-time regime as the student council president. Claudia leads Ayato to her office and welcomes him into Asterisks. She informs Ayato that his duty as a scholarship student is to restore the school's glory in the Festa competition. When Claudia adds that the school will grant whatever he wishes, Ayato cuts in and tells her he has no pressing desires. Claudia chuckles in surprise and asks Ayato why he enrolled in the school in the forest place. Ayato has a flashback and declares that he has a question for Claudia. Ayato asks Claudia if his sister Haruka attended the school. Claudia immediately shows Ayato a record of his sister's enrollment 5 years ago, before adding that every other record of his sister has been erased after she withdrew from the school a few months after her enrollment. Claudia tells dumb Ayato about a device called the Cerveresta Orga Lux, the most powerful among other Orga Lux weapons, before adding that the last battle documentation the school has on it was from 5 years ago. Claudia hands him a spare weapon while she prepares Ayato's personal Cerveresta. In class, Julis protests after the teacher assigns Ayato to become her sitting partner. She musters up some courage and thanks Ayato for saving her twice in the morning. A random homeless-looking guy behind them chuckles and introduces himself as Yabuki and Ayato's roommate. Yabuki informs Ayato that bratty Julis is not only a crowned princess of a small European kingdom, but is also one of those with rare genistella called the Stregus. On their way to the dorm, Ayato pulls out the weapon tossed to him and returns it to Yabuki, its rightful owner. While the boys bond over the weapon, they hear a manly voice scold Julis for dueling with a newbie. The voice challenges Julis to a duel, but Julis declines. Yabuki explains that each school in Asterisk has a ranking system called the Named Cults, and the top 12 on each page are known as Page 1s. He adds that Lester, the buffoon trying to fight Julis, is ranked 9. When Ayato mentions that Lester must be powerful, Yabuki informs him that Lester, desperate for a rematch, had challenged Julis thrice and had lost all 3 times. Dumb Ayato has a flashback to when his sister advises him to follow their father's warnings to avoid fighting because his tremendous power can lead to hurting himself and his peers. After a little sister-brother bonding moment, the 2 siblings promise to protect each other. Ayato wakes up from his slumber and sighs in disappointment. During his run the following morning, Idiotic Ayato recalls his conversation with Julius and Lester the previous day. Lester had to be convinced by his friends not to take his anger out on Ayato, and Julius chastises Ayato for his uncultured attitude. With her usual feisty expression, Julius mentions that she is curious to see how long Ayato's innocent facade will last. Ayato suddenly asks Julius why she duels other students frequently, and is shocked to hear her response. Apparently Julius needs money, which is ironic since she is a princess, but Ayato dismisses his questions. Julius continues that she needs to partake in the coming Phoenix Festa. Homeless-looking Yabuki butts into their conversation and asks Julius if she has found tag partners for the Phoenix Festa. Ayato reads Julius's uncomfortable expression and asks her if she has any friends to pair with. Julius fumbles her words, and Yabuki asks her what attributes she looks for in a tagmate. While obnoxious Julius paints a picture of a perfect night, Yabuki gets a notification and leaves the scene in a rush. Nimrod Ayato foolishly asks Julius for directions to the boys' dorm, and Julius cracks up at Ayato's idiotic request. Ayato calls Julius's attention to her cute laugh, and Julius gets uncomfortable and nervous. Ayato asks Julius to show him around the city as her way of repaying his debt, and Julius blushes a bit before agreeing to Ayato's requests. After his long flashback, useless Ayato greets bratty Julius in the classroom, and the whole class gasps in surprise when Julius responds. It was quite unbelievable to see the bratty princess engage in any form of communication with her fellow students. Moments later, Ayato recognizes a blue-haired girl sitting beside him and speaks to her. Turns out the blue-haired girl is his childhood friend, Saya, who had left him to travel overseas 6 years ago. Saya lazily complains about her father pushing her to the school to advertise his prototype weapon to people, and Yabuki develops an interest in the strange girl. Julius begins to feel jealous at the attention showered on Saya, and huffs in annoyance. She goes to the toilet to fix her face before butting into Ayato's conversation with Saya and stealing him away. Saya offers to take Ayato around in Julius's stead, and Julius, who acts like she has been forced against her will, suddenly declares that she isn't one to break a promise. While the two girls bicker over who is fit to show Ayato around, Claudia swoops in and adds herself to the equation. After a short scene of disagreement between the girls, Claudia hands Ayato a document containing the details of his Orga Lux weapon. She informs him that a compatibility test will be held the following day, before asking him to sign the documents. Julius antagonizes Claudia for being floozy, and Ayato asks the girls if they are friends. In contrast to Claudia's response, Julius clarifies that they are only two people who have crossed each other's paths a couple of unwanted times. After Claudia takes her leave, Julius and Saya agree to show Ayato around together. While on their so-called tour, Saya asks Julius how she managed to get out unscathed after dueling with Ayato. Prideful Julius feels insulted by Saya's speech and challenges her to a duel after she claims to be on the same level as her. Just before the duel begins, 3 light arrows are shot at Julius. Julius turns to the shooter and spots a veiled man by a water fountain with a bow focused on her. Without wasting time, Julius attacks the man with a fire spell, but another veiled man swoops in from nowhere and blocks her attack. Badass Saya effortlessly summons a big-ass gun and shoots and hits the man with a blast. After Julius compliments Saya for her massive power output, Saya blasts the archer and turns to Julius with a bored expression before asking her if she is ready to continue their duel. Sheesh. What a cold-hearted battle baddie. Julius waves her question away, and Ayato walks into the scene looking extremely confused at the messed up and wet environment. The next day, Claudia discusses the attempted assassination of Julius with Ayato in an elevator. While the two discuss the strong-headed princess who refuses to cooperate with an investigation, the elevator stops and reveals Lester at its entrance. Claudia introduces Lester as a fellow Orga Lux aspiring user, and the two men panic at the sight of each other. In the testing room, Ayato suddenly feels a weird constricting sensation after Lester activates the Serveresta Orgalux. Unfortunately for Lester, the weapon rejects him repeatedly, and Lester is forced to withdraw from his compatibility test. Ayato feels the strange sensation once more, before proceeding to begin his test. The Serveresta tries to attack him, but Ayato smartly overtakes it and plunges it into the ground. Claudia commends Ayato for taming the berserk weapon, and the whole room is surprised to learn that Ayato has passed his compatibility test with a whopping 97%. Later that night, Ayato visits Claudia's dorm and blushes at how underdressed she is. Slutty Claudia welcomes Ayato into her dorm and goes straight to the point after a bit of unethical implications. She shows Ayato the list of students who had been forced to withdraw from the upcoming Phoenix competition due to injury, and Ayato smartly concluded that the students had been injured by the same group of people who attacked Julius the previous day. Claudia exposes that the school's disciplinary committee has strong suspicions against Lester and his lackeys. Claudia adds that she wants Ayato to stay by Julius's side and secretly protect the strong-headed princess. Ayato asks Claudia why she cares so much about Julius's safety. Claudia makes a speech about being the student council president and fulfilling her duty of protecting the students. The next morning, Ayato stares at Julius and takes in her beauty. Julie asks Ayato what he is looking at before blushing profusely when Ayato compliments her. While Julia shows Ayato around the city, Julius insists they grab lunch at a burger joint. While watching Julius happily munch on her burger, buffoon Ayato questions her princess etiquette. Julius lets him go after a light scolding, before mentioning that the burger joint was introduced to her by a friend back home. Idiotic Ayato smiles and changes the topic. He informs Julius about a few of the conversations he had with Claudia over Julius's attempted assassination and asks her to avoid going out or dueling students alone. As expected, Julius strongly declines Ayato's request and insists that the sloppy nitwits are not worth bending her ways for. Ayato smiles at Julius's predicted response, and Lester arrives at the scene with his lackeys. Lester mocks Julius for hanging around the city despite being at the top of a hitman's list, and Julius coldly calls Lester off for eavesdropping on her conversation with Ayato before reminding him that he is not close to being a worthy opponent. Lester slams his large hand on the table and orders Julius to fight him. Ayato intervenes and tries to reason with him, but Lester shuns him. Ayato insists he cannot be ignored and insults Lester for being a pained fool, desperate to fix his broken loser ego. Ayato's words tick Lester off wrongly. He drags Ayato's collars in annoyance and promises to crush him. Ayato refuses to fight Lester, and Lester's lackeys begin trying to stroke his ego into giving up his battle advances. After Lester succumbs to his lackeys and walks away, Julius commends Ayato for handling the situation. While walking around an enclosed space, Ayato and Julius come across a group of students from La Wolf, fighting one another. Julius immediately recognizes their tactics and informs Ayato that the pretense fight was a trick to attack them without suspicion. Ayato asks Julius if she thinks the sketchy students are behind her past assassination attempts. Julius admits that she does not think so, seeing as the La Wolf school is full of scumbags who would do anything for the smallest amount of money. Julius dodges the first attack sent at her and smiles mischievously. Within a few seconds, Julius arranges the student's unconscious body in a hot pile. She pulls a random guy by his buzzard haircut and asks him who the mastermind behind their attack is. The scumbag with a bad haircut admits that an unknown person promised to pay them if they hurt Julius and Ayato. Julius demands a description of the employer, and the bad haircut dude begins spilling the beans. He suddenly stops his description and points at a veiled man in the woods before announcing that his employer is behind them watching. The exposed veiled man flees into the woods with Julius hot behind his trail. A group of veiled men work together in the woods to take down Julius. One of the veiled men shoots a light arrow at Ayato to create enough distraction to flee the woods with his colleagues. At night, obtuse Ayato leaps into Julius's room window and blushes in embarrassment when Julius orders him to remove his clothes. Julius suddenly connects the dots and nervously scolds perverted Ayato to get his mind out of the gutter before admitting she wanted to amend Ayato's torn clothes. While Julius is stitching Ayato's jacket, Ayato snoops around and spots a group childhood photo of Julius. He picks the frame up and asks Julius to identify the friend she told him about at the burger joint. Julius flushes in embarrassment before telling Ayato about her tomboy phase, who enjoyed sneaking out of the palace. She tells him a story about when she had one day skipped out of the palace and had gotten lost. She continues that a group of thugs grabbed her into an alley, but the girls in the frame came to her rescue. Julius adds that she eventually found out that her rescue heroes were from the orphanage in the slums, and she continued sneaking out of the palace to follow them around. Ayato curiously asks if the girls knew Julius was a princess, and Julius admits she kept it from them. Julius mentions that she has come to Asterisk to seek money to fund the orphanage. When Ayato asks Julius why she didn't just abuse her princess's advantage to settle the orphanage, Julius frowns and declares that her kingdom will never approve such a budget, and she is left with no choice but to fend for the money herself. She shows him her handkerchief embroidered by her best friend in the orphanage. The following day, Ayato notices a change in Julius's behavior after walking in on her reading a document in class. While Ayato and Yabuki discuss Julius's strange behavior, Claudia walks in, and Yabuki immediately informs her of Julius's recent behavior. The three soon realize that Julius must have received a letter from her attackers and had gone to confront them. With a fierce look, Julius walks into a dilapidated building and orders her attacker to show his face. Silas Norman, one of Lester's lackeys, walks into the scene with a maniac smile. Silas congratulates Julius for cleverly figuring out his identity, and Julius lets him know that she was only able to put two and two together after a sloppy slip of Silas's tongue. Silas asks Julius to tell him what words slipped to warrant suspicions, and Julius immediately reminds him of what he had said to Lester the previous day while trying to hold Lester back at the burger joint. Silas suddenly compliments Julius's brilliance before pointing out that Ayato's provocation must have been planned. Julius confirms, and Silas immediately goes to business. Silas orders Julius to withdraw from the Phoenix Festa, but Julius strongly declines, drags out her weapon, and threatens to annihilate him. Silas smiles sinisterly, and Lester's loud, angry voice circulates the dilapidated building. When Lester asks Psycho Silas if he is responsible for the attacks, Julius butts in and exposes that Silas has been taking orders from another school to attack the strong students of Seidukan. Lester chastises Silas for turning his back on his fellow student, and Sikas mocks him before reminding him that in the end, every student enrolled in Asterisk is a mutual enemy, and all he did was monetize his hatred. Lester orders Silas to shut his trap and attempts to attack him, but one of the veiled men shows up from nowhere, catches Lester's weapon mid-air, and tosses it backward like a toy. Silas summons the remaining veiled men to the scene and introduces them as his dolls. The veiled men remove their veils and reveal their robotic features, but Silas assures his opponents that they're puppets. Lester attacks the 3 puppets with a heavy swing of his axe, but the puppets immediately pop back into position after receiving a massive blow. Lester tries to attack them again, but the puppets bombard him with light bullets. After Lester falls to the ground, Silas calls his puppets in order and surrounds Julius and Lester with a shocking amount of puppets. He mocks Lester and watches him get overwhelmed by the puppets. Julius decides to take action. She summons a fire dragon that burns a good amount of the puppet, and Silas commends her. Julius tries to fight through the puppet attacks, but the puppets eventually outnumber her and hold her captive. While in captivity, Julius exposes the school behind the attacks, and Silas informs her that her knowledge will prevent him from letting her go. Silas kicks Julius's wound and orders one of his puppets to finish her. Immediately, the puppet raises its weapon against Julius. Ayato swoops into the scene and slices the puppet in 2. Instead of thanking her savior, Julius scolds Ayato for coming after her and butting into her business. Ayato admits that he has been searching for a purpose all his life, but after meeting her, he has made it his goal to protect her from any harm, just as she would to the kids in the orphanage. Julius blushes, and a puppet emerges from a cloud of dust with Silas on its shoulder. Silas commends him for the surprise attack before summoning the rest of his standing puppets. The puppets begin shooting light bullets at Ayato and Julia, but Ayato activates a special power and shields himself from the bullets. In a split second, Ayato dismantles the puppets and confronts Silas, who is so close to shitting his pants. Silas somehow repairs his fallen puppets and orders the multitude to attack Ayato in annoyance. While gliding through the puppet attacks, Ayato points out that Silas must be using a chess visualization to control his puppets, and Silas screams in anger and a sprinkle of fear. Ayato cuts through the nasty puppets, and Silas watches his game turn against him in horror. In desperation, Silas orders his queen, aka a giant-ass puppet, to finish Ayato off. After dodging the first attack from the queen, Ayato dismantles it in 9 strategic sword swings, and Silas jumps onto a random puppet and attempts to flee. Ayato goes after Silas with Julius hanging around him and piloting them. Ayato knocks Silas down, and Claudia rounds things up. Ayato suddenly feels a sharp pain, and an imaginary chain covers him. After his little episode, Ayato faints, and Julius screams in fear. Ayato recalls his sister, chaining his savage powers for the sake of his safety, and suddenly wakes up on Julius's legs. Ayato tries to break free, but Julius assures him she doesn't mind. She asks Ayato, who had put a constricting spell on him, and Ayato admits that his sister did. When asked why, Ayato mentions that he has been searching for his sister, who had gone missing for 5 years, to get answers. Ayato suddenly proposes to become Julius's Phoenix Festa tagmate, and Julia agrees with a tear in her eyes. On the other hand, after Claudia destroys Silas, Yabuki emerges from the dark, and the 2 students who are not who they claim to be discuss sketchy topics. In a tech room, a psycho tech sis watches Claudia and Yabuki from a CCTV and laughs hysterically. In a meeting with other Asterisk student council presidents, Claudia answers her edgy colleagues about the recent development of a new type of Orga Lux. Claudia informs the group that she will send engineers to the partnering school and round everything up. A member of the committee reminds Claudia about their unspoken rule of secret deals, and Claudia assures them that her deal with the other school is no secret, but rather an official collaboration. In the hallway, Ayato bumps into a short. The 2 colliding idiots blush after the full-chested girl becomes aware of her compromising landing. Ayato apologizes to the frail-looking girl, pulls her from the ground, and removes a twig from her beautiful hair. A thick voice of a man calls out the frail girl, whose name is Kirin, and Kirin nervously picks up her weapon and runs to meet the owner of the voice. After watching Kirin skip out of the scene, Ayato suddenly remembers he is late for his appointment with Julius and begins to fear the sort of punishment Julius had prepared for him. In the training room, Ayato keeps up with Julius's attack until she tricks him into making a wrong move. Julius gets bewildered when Ayato cuts through her fire surge, dissolves the fire, and raises his weapon to her throat. The buzzer goes off, signifying the end of their training session, and Julius complains about her losing to Ayato once again. Ayato assures Julius that their fight was a close call before adding that he can only release his full power for 3 minutes without activating his constricting spell. When Ayato points out that not many people in Asterisk are stronger than Julius, Julius informs him that all the student body presidents in Asterisks are stronger than her. After Julius's speech, Ayato brings her attention to another student from La Wolf, famous for winning 2 successive Lindworm Festa. Julius recognizes the said girl and calls out her name with a strange expression. Ayato catches on and asks Julius what is going through her mind, but Julius swiftly changes the topic. Moments later, Claudia interrupts Lester's somewhat apology to Ayato in the training room, with 2 girls behind her. One of the girls suddenly begins acting out like a psycho. Claudia introduces the calm girl to the group as Camilla of Alicante Academy, and the other psycho girl as Ernesta. Claudia explains that Saidukan, their school, and Alicante have decided to work on a new Lux prototype together. Julius bitterly asks Claudia why she had brought the 2 girls as representatives of Alicante amidst other students, and Ernesta butts in to confess her undying wish of seeing Ayato in action. Julius gets pissed when Ernesta runs around Ayato. She pulls out her sword and warns Ernesta to stay off Ayato, but Ernesta ignores her and continues her creepy investigation of Ayato's buildup. After her creepy show, Ernesta whispers into Ayato's ear that he won't be so lucky next time before kissing his cheek. Saya and Julius go berserk at the crazy floozy beside Ayato. Camilla apologizes on behalf of her strange partner and spots Saya's badass gun. She compliments it and exposes all the shortcomings of the machine gun. Saya agrees to the obvious shortcomings of her weapon before warning Camilla against insulting her father's legacy and demanding an apology. Camilla recognizes Saya's father and declares that she can never take back her words of criticism to a man like Saya's father who abandoned the Alicante. Claudia sniffs an upcoming duel in the air and reminds her guests of their mission. However, Saya insists on a duel, but Camilla instigates. She holds on till in the Phoenix Festa before calling Ernesta and leaving the room. After Claudia and her guests leave the room, Saya asks Ayato to become her partner, but jealous Julius declares that Ayato is already her partner. On their way to Alicante, Camilla and Ernesta discuss Ernesta's secret game plan against Ayato and Seidukan. The next day, while Yabuki informs Ayato about the 2 types of curriculum under Alicante, Ayato hears a slap sound. Ayato investigates the sound and figures out Liron had been slapped by her supposed guardian. Ayato interrupts when the man raises his hand to hit Kirin once more. The man introduces himself as Koichiro, Kirin's uncle, before asking Ayato to eat his dust. Ayato introduces himself. Koichiro suddenly activates his stats records and asks Ayato to state his requests. After realizing Ayato handles a Lux, Ayato awkwardly asks Koichiro to stop harming Kirin, and Koichiro agrees to never lay a finger on Kirin if Ayato wins a duel against Kirin. Koichiro walks out and leaves Kirin to finish her duel with Ayato. Ayato tries to convince Kirin not to fight, but Kirin calmly assures him that nothing can change her. Kirin pulls out her weapon, and Ayato accepts her challenge. Koichiro instructs Kirin not to cut through Ayato's Lux sword, and Kirin charges toward Ayato with swift sword swings. Julius walks into the garden and scolds Ayato under her breath for participating in a duel before the competition. While Yabuki documents and analyzes every move of the opponents, Julius asks him how long the duel has been going on. Yabuki reports that the fight has been going on for 5 minutes. Ayato suddenly feels himself reaching his limits and attempts to end his duel with one swing of his sword, but Kirin dodges his attack and wonders why Ayato is rushing to conclude their fight. Kirin suddenly sees an opening and slashes through his school batch. Kirin is declared the winner of the duel, and Koichiro escorts Kirin out of the scene. While Kirin and her uncle walk away, Julia scolds him for dueling with the highest scorer of the school, aka the rank 1. In the hallway, Koichiro scolds pushover Kirin for taking so long in her duel and being a weak-willed brat whose only skill is swordsmanship. He reminds her that without his help, she could easily become a rank 1 student who will be wiped off the chat in Seidukan history. Kirin feels empty and agrees with her uncle's hateful words. In the training room, Julius confronts Ayato to discuss his duel with Kirin. Julius points out that Koichiro is wrong for treating his niece like a tool, before adding that she would have also accepted the duel if she were in his shoes. Ayato thanks Julius, and Julius suddenly acts up in nervousness. Julius admits that what she was angry about wasn't because of the duel, but because Ayato lost. Julius points out that Claudia is ranked 2 in the school, and Kirin is celebrated because she has never lost a battle before, even though her only weapon is a Japanese sword. Julius concludes that they need to rethink their battle strategy for the Phoenix to increase their chances of winning. Ayato meets Claudia by the pool to collect a new school badge. After acquiring the school badge, Claudia informs Ayato that Koichiro is not only an employee of the Parents Seidukan Association, aka the Galaxy Integrated Enterprise Foundation, but he wields considerable authority and is in charge of the Academy's talent scouting. Ayato concludes that Koichiro must be forcing Kirin to fight against her will. Claudia chips in that Kirin has a personal goal, and elevating to the executive level is no easy task for Koichiro because of his selfishness. Ayato points out that Claudia knows a lot about the executives, and Claudia quietly mentions that her mother is an executive. While Ayato walks to his dorm with a mind full of wonders about Kirin, a group of boys call his attention to Kirin, who had come to visit him. In the cafeteria, Kirin nervously thanks Ayato for standing up for her, but Ayato dismisses her thanks by reminding her that he lost. Ayato pats the 13-year-old prodigy and opens the door to reveal countless curious cats on the floor. Later on, Ayato and Kirin walk along a straight road. Kirin informs Ayato that her father is a highly disciplined man, and Ayato contributes that he heard that her father's training style is strict. Kirin is fascinated by Ayato's knowledge about her father and asks him if he can pull off one of her father's sword styles. Without waiting for an answer, Kirin recites Ayato's sword from their duel and apologizes for over-talking. Ayato gives her a cute pass, and the two students continue their walk. Ayato suddenly asks Kirin what she is fighting for, and Kirin strongly says that she is fighting to free her father, and her uncle has provided her with the quickest path to achieve her dream. She adds that she doesn't mind her uncle's ulterior motives, and it is fair that they both have benefits in the end. Ayato points out that nothing seems fair about her uncle's pact with her, and Kirin tells Ayato that her uncle hates Genestella with a pathetic smile. Kirin stops abruptly and asks Ayato how he trains. Idiotic Ayato readily invites her to his training sessions and mentions something about asking Julius first. Kirin sadly points out that she has been warned against training with the top ranks. Ayato dismisses his first idea and invites her to join him during his alone morning training sessions. Kirin blushes at the thought of training alone with Ayato and nervously accepts his offer. Saya attacks Ayato at his dorm gate and questions him about Kirin. Saya lets go of Ayato and admits that she was looking for him to get an answer. Ayato apologizes that he has already agreed to be Julius's tagmate, and Saya resumes questioning Ayato about Kirin. Ayato explains who Kirin is, and Saya feels inferior for having a flat chest. Over lunch, Julius interrogates Ayato about Kirin, but Ayato simply tells her that they train together in the mornings. Ayato notices Julius is struggling with her overly spicy food and offers to exchange meals. At Alicante, Ernesta turns to her monitors to watch Ayato's progress. She spots a strange girl beside him and asks who she is. Camilla informs her psycho partner that the girl beside Ayato is the rank 1 student of Seidukan. Ernesta laughs and asks her partner how successful her fishing expenditure was, but Camilla mentions that she had no luck extracting what they needed from the school. Ernesta maniacally assumes what they would gain if Seidukan loses the Phoenix, and Camilla accuses her crazy partner of gambling their success. While the girls from Alicante watch, the unsuspecting fools, Ayato and Kirin, blush over holding hands. 2 red flashes appear in the fog, and the fog suddenly begins to clear out. Ayato and Kirin get ambushed by a pack of monsters. Ayato cuts the hand of the first monster to attack him, and gets shocked when he watches the amputated hand stick back to its owner. When 2 monsters attack Ayato, Ayato uses a sword style to cut through them, but the monsters reform themselves almost immediately. Seeing as cutting down the monsters was proving to be useless, Kirin focuses on one of the monsters. She slices it in 2 and immediately dives the liquidated monster until she destroys its core and kills it permanently. The rest of the monsters flee the scene, and Ayato commends her for thinking farther than he could. Ayato picks up the sliced core of the monster and immediately traces it to Alicante. The monsters suddenly emerge from the forest and throw firebombs at them. The impact of the firebombs causes a part of the road to collapse with Ayato on it. Unfortunately for him though, Kirin holds onto him, but his weight pulls her into the ditch. Ernesta appears unsatisfied over how easily her monsters led Ayato and Kirin to the ditch, but she cheers up and becomes eager to execute the second phase of her plans. Ayato and Kirin, who cannot swim, pop up from an underground water channel, and a dragon-like monster burst out from the water. Ayato activates his sword and surrounds himself and Kirin with a protective spell, just in time before the dragon monster attacks them. The dragon goes back into hiding, and Kirin begs Ayato to abandon her to avoid being disqualified over an injury. Ayato assures the frail girl that she doesn't have to worry her cute head over little things, and neither should she refer to herself as a dead weight. Ayato makes an opening in one of the pillars of the channel and places Kirin on it. Just in time, the the dragon tries to attack, but Ayato cuts its head off. The dragon regenerates, and Ayato asks Kirin to pinpoint the dragon's core. Kirin informs Ayato that the dragon's core is shifting positions, and Ayato activates an amazing spell on his luck sword. He elongates his sword, cuts through the dragon's firebombs, and splits it in two, core included. The dragon dissolves into thin air, and Ayato's constricting spell activates. While drying their wet clothes, Ayato tells Kirin about his circumstances of not being able to fight for long. Kirin gets nervously jealous when Ayato mentions that he is pushing himself to fight by Julius's side, but Ayato clears the air. Kirin apologizes for her actions and draws closer to Ayato. Ayato suddenly asks Kirin why she is fighting, and Kirin admits that her father is being detained as a criminal, and she wishes to save him. Here's a little backstory, guys. 5 years ago, a thief broke into a store where Kirin and her father were, and held Kirin hostage. Kirin's father killed the thief and got sent to prison because he is a Genestella who killed a regular man. Back to the present, Kirin blames herself for not taking down the thief herself, even if she could, before continuing that if she doesn't do something about her father's prison sentence, it'll be several decades until her father is released. Kirin adds that she has no choice but to throw herself at the mercy of her uncle to help her father. Ayato tells Kirin that following her uncle will only lead to a one-sided dead end. He pats Kirin on the head and says he will help her fulfill her goal if she wants. Kirin looks into Ayato's eyes, and Ayato suddenly becomes aware of Kirin's underwear. The rescue team flashes a light through the hole and fishes the students out of the ditch. Moments later, Koichiro orders Kirin to stay away from Ayato and his troubles, but for once, Kirin declines her uncle's orders. Koichiro slaps Kirin across the face and reminds her that he is responsible for everything she has achieved. Kirin agrees with her uncle and rejects any form of help from her uncle in the future. Koichiro tries to hit Kirin again in annoyance, but Kirin catches his fist mid-air, squeezes it, ends their pact, and walks away. Koichiro asks Kirin how she plans to remain rank 1 without his help, but Kirin assures him she doesn't care about being the number 1. During a fixed match, Kirin thanks Ayato for complying with her request to duel with him. She explains that fighting Ayato is her first true step in Asterisk, and Ayato promises to go all out. The top ranks of the school discuss the fixed match, and Julius expresses her worry for Ayato. Saya assures Ayato that he has faced more powerful opponents before, and Lester chips in that Ayato has a plan. Yabuki mentions that just like Lester, Ayato had come to borrow a lux from him. The duel begins, and Kirin wastes no time. She makes the first attacks by making swift motions with her sword. Ayato blocks her attacks and creates a space between them with a swing of his sword. Kirin chants some weird shit and declares that she will finish Ayato off with her final move, but Ayato powers up and prepares himself against her impact. Ayato blocks Kirin's swing and releases a fog. Kirin leaps backward and swiftly blocks 3 light shots at her. Ayato emerges out of the smoke with a smirk and a spear. Kirin blocks his spear missiles and declares that a few trucks cannot throw her off her game. Ayato tosses his spear at her and snarkily mentions that the more trick moves one has, the trickier it gets. Ayato pulls out 2 daggers and tricks Kirin into focusing on blocking his dagger attacks. When Kirin releases a dagger from Ayato's hand, she leaps into the sky to execute her final move, but Ayato holds on to her, slams her to the ground, and wins the duel. After Ayato is declared the victor of the duel, Julius and Saya congratulate him in the locker room. Claudia walks into the room with Kirin, and Kirin asks to join Ayato in the girls' training. Julius freaks out and scolds Saya for always intruding on her training with Ayato when Saya agrees to let Kirin train with them. Koichiro bangs at the locker door and demands to see Kirin. Ayato lets him in, and Koichiro scolds her for participating in a duel he did not consent to, but Kirin reminds him she wants nothing to do with him. Koichiro raises his fist to hit Kirin, but Ayato holds him and warns him to back off. Pained, Koichiro threatens Kirin that he will spill her father's nasty secrets, but Claudia butts in and threatens to tell her mother about Koichiro's plans to tarnish a student's image for his selfish interest. Koichiro gets nervous and walks out of the room, ignoring Kirin's tears of thanks for how far she has come with his help. Ayato walks up to Kirin to pat her, and Kirin wipes her teary eyes. She thanks him for his help before asking if they could upgrade their friendship to a first-name basis. In the secret room, Camilla and Ernesta watch the higher ranks of other schools fall into their trap and jubilate that their school has a higher chance of winning the Festa, with almost all the high-ranking students of other schools disqualified over injuries. The 2 girls discuss how to take down the only obstacle on their way to victory, Ayato. After Saya and Kirin take down numerous training bots together in the training room, they link up with Ayato, Yabuki, and Julius in the cafeteria. A random female student walks up to Ayato to request an autograph and wishes him luck in the upcoming Festa after getting the autograph. As expected, the girls frown at Ayato for giving other females who aren't them attention, but Yabuki tries to make them understand that it is natural to receive attention, especially when the person in question is an unknown student who defeated a rank 1 student of the school. Yabuki reminds the girls of the uproar each of them had caused during their time of sudden elevation, and Julius nervously changes the topic. Ayato admits he was shocked when he found out that Saya had paired with Kirin for the Phoenix Festa. Saya explains that she needed to get a tagmate to qualify for the competition so that she could make Camilla eat her disrespectful words and offer an apology on behalf of her trying father. Kirin chips in that she gave in to Saya because she also decided to partake in the competition out of free will. Julius mocks the girls for having zero teamwork, unlike Ayato and her, but Ayato chips in and calmly asks Kirin and Saya to work on their cooperation. Saya announces that she and Kirin won't be training with them the following day, and they would rather spend the day together to strengthen their bond. The following day, Saya admits she has no idea how to bond with people after an awkward wave of forced conversations. Kirin nervously admits that she also doesn't know how to bond with people, and Saya suggests they do an activity together. The girls agree to go shopping for a gift for Saya's father's birthday. After a few visits to different shops and malls, the girls are unable to choose a suitable present for Saya's father, so they retrace their steps back to where they came from. Kirin asks Saya what her father is like, and Saya responds that he is somewhat of a mad scientist. A light bulb turns on in Saya's mind, and Saya immediately thinks of a birthday gift for her father. She asks Kirin to accompany her to the location of a shop she found on the map, and when Kirin asks why she needs her around, Saya points out that she is bad with maps, and she always ends up lost whenever she follows a map to an unknown place. With all that said, the two girls make their way to an illegal secondhand gun and luck shop located in a sketchy alley. Saya ignores Kirin's terrified expression and purchases a busted gun. After Saya fangirls over how good of a deal she acquired from the gun shop, she asks Kirin what she wants to do, and after a bit of persuasion, Kirin decides on what activity she wants to do. In the next scene, Saya is teaching Kirin how to swim in a public pool. She suddenly asks Kirin why she didn't ask Ayato to teach her, and Kirin loses her balance at the mention of Ayato. Saya apologizes, and Kirin explains that she doesn't want to present herself as vulnerable to Ayato. Saya commends Kirin's bravery before excusing herself to get drinks. While Kirin is practicing alone, she loses control and collides with a random blonde chilling in a raft. The blonde scolds Kirin in annoyance until she realizes Kirin is the rank 1 student of Sikudan. Immediately, the blonde figures out that Kirin has lost her rank and cannot swim. She begins running her mouth like a fool again, but Saya silences her by flinging an ice cube at her. The blonde erupts from the pool in annoyance and demands to know who has violated her. Saya shows herself, and the blonde girl mocks her for being a rankless nincompoop. While walking on water, the blonde girl challenges Saya to a duel before introducing herself as Queenvale Girls Academy's rank 35th, Violet Weinberg. Saya responds uninterestedly to Violet's boastful introduction and urges her to begin the duel. The duel begins, and Saya knocks Violet out with a blast almost immediately. Saya is pronounced the winner of the duel, and the onlookers chant in appraisal. Later that day, Saya advises Kirin to grow some balls and asks her to learn to take pride in herself. Kirin thanks Saya for her advice and asks her why she had chosen her as her tagmate. Saya responds that among many of Kirin's good battle attributes, the fact that she uses the same sword style as Ayato makes it obvious that they work as a team. The following day, Kirin and Saya master their battle cooperation and do a fantastic job in the training room. A few days before the Festa, the school's student body president of La Wolf releases and instructs a school prisoner to eliminate Ayato in the duel before his orgalux turns into a bigger pain in his left butt cheek. The regard-looking prisoner agrees to do as instructed by the student council president provided he promises to keep her sister safe. During the opening ceremony of the Phoenix Festa, Ayato notices the president of the Festa committee while he is making an entry speech and asks Julius what she knows about him. When Julius explains that the president is a sneaky, power-hungry, and corrupt son of a bee, delusional Ayato sees a giant evil smirk at the corner of his mouth that disappears almost immediately after it forms. The alleged power-hungry president announces that the use of more than one weapon has been banned before advising the contestants to take note of the rule change. In the preparation room, Ayato decides to invite Lester for a quick lunch before their respective matches. Lester strongly declines the offer in annoyance and reminds Ayato that he is only interested in fighting with him and nothing more. Before stupidly relentless Ayato can go after Lester, Saya pops up from nowhere and attaches herself to Ayato like a leech. Kirin slowly walks into the scene and nervously offers Ayato a box of lunch she and Saya had prepared to cheer him up. Julius gets jealous after watching how much attention Ayato showered on the girls and storms off to the waiting room to eat while the rest of the group follows behind her and settles in the waiting room. After munching on the rice balls, Ayato tunes into the live recording of the competition. A commentator recites the rules of the game once again, and the girls discuss the nature of their opponents with Ayato. The second match of the Phoenix Festa begins. Ayato and Julius are introduced to the ring by the announcers, and the automated referee calls the beginning of the duel. When the opponents run towards Ayato and Julius, Julius excuses herself and lets Ayato work his magic. Ayato temporarily breaks free from his constricting spell, elongates his Cervicera Orgalux sword, and cuts through the badges of his two opponents in one swing. Team Ayato is announced as the winner of the match, and the crowd goes crazy in excitement. On the way to the waiting room, Ayato and Julius discuss their next battle strategies and the required improvements before congratulating themselves for a perfect first round. Yabuki links up with the victors in the waiting room with an ulterior motive to sneakily request a contestant's pass to record the next match between Le Wolf and Alicant. The commentators announce the arrival of Alicant contestants to the ring before passing on information sent to her by Ernesta. The announcer explains to the audience that the puppets in the ring have been programmed by the Alicant contestants and will represent their presence all through their time in the Phoenix Festa. In the contestants' reserved seats for the Alicant school, Camilla chastises Ernesta for spilling their puppet's secret and risking their win, but Ernesta assures her not to fret and that her puppets will win either way. In the ring, one of Ernesta's puppets offers his Le Wolf's opponents a full minute of allowing them to do whatever they wish. The Le Wolf contestants feel insulted by the puppet's ridiculing offer and attempt to land the first attack. However, the Le Wolf contestants stop in their tracks after the puppet gets shot in the head by his puppet tagmate. After a short banter between the tagmates, the female puppets agree to allow the opponents to come at them for a full minute and promise not to lift a finger at them. The Le Wolf contestants accept the ridiculing proposal, and the automated referee calls the beginning of the match. During the 1-minute grace, the commanding-looking tagmate among the Le Wolf contestants chooses to fight the male puppet while his partner faces the female. The man activates his signature move and tries to attack the male puppet with his drill-converted arm, but the male puppet blocks the drilling attack and mockingly counts down to a minute loudly. Frustrated about not getting close to scratching the puppet, the man calls his tagmate for help and realizes that just like him, his tagmate can barely keep up with his puppet opponent. The man gets scared of running out of time and unleashes his maximum power. Unfortunately for him though, his greatest power fails to get past the puppet's shield. After dissolving all of the man's attacks, the puppet watches him fall to the ground in exhaustion before announcing the end of their 1-minute grace. Ernesta's puppet crushes the opponent's badge. The announcer declares Ernesta and Canilla the winner of the match, and the crowd goes berserk in cheers. While watching the match highlights, Ayato and the girls discuss how hard it will be to break down the protective barrier of Ernesta's puppet. Saya receives a call from her father, who informs her that the puppets are AI-powered. Ayato recognizes Saya's father's voice and says hello to the floating holographic screen. Her father asks Saya if she has received the new gun he sent to her, but Saya informs him she hasn't. When the talking screen asks Saya to check customs, Saya assures her father that she can manage with her regular gun for now. After the call ends, Saya excuses herself to check customs as requested by her father, and Kirin excitedly tags along. Yabuki informs Ayato and Julius that he wants to try sneaking into the winner's press conference to acquire information. With all their friends gone, Ayato and Julius agree to step out to practice a bit. In the Alicant's waiting room, Ernesta commends her puppets for doing a fine job at the ring. Rimical, the female puppet, bows to Ernesta and thanks her for her graceful comments. When Rimical notices her partner laughing out loud, she smacks him with her weapon and demands respect on behalf of their master. Ernesta asks Rimical to let her partner off the hook, and Rimical's partner asks Ernesta why he is helpless against Rimical when they were built to have the same specifications. Ernesta lies that his weakness is tied to his male features, when in truth, he will always feel inferior because Remical is his limiter. On their way to the Festa arena, Ayato and Julius stop by the road to investigate a street fight. Julius recognizes the fighter as Irene Urzais, a Page 1 student of Le Wolf. After knocking down her last opponent, Irene recognizes Ayato's face and walks towards him with a smirk. Julius stands protectively in front of Ayato with a frown and asks Irene what business she has with Ayato. Irene asks Julia to eat her dust, but Julia stands her ground and reminds Irene that street fighting is beyond dangerous. When Julius mentions that Irene can easily be disqualified for her recklessness, Irene activates her weapon, and Ayato and Julius practically teleport away from her. A young voice rings within the crowd, and Irene suddenly gets nervous. Priscilla, Irene's cherished little sister walks up to Irene and apologizes to Ayato and Julius on behalf of her thuggish sister. Priscilla forces Irene to apologize and promises to give her an earful over her nasty behavior. Priscilla drags her sister out of the scene, and Julius tells Ayato about the vague records Claudia sent of the two sisters and tagmates. Ayato turns to Julius and asks why she had provoked Irene moments ago. Julius points out that Irene must be targeting Ayato since she ignored her when she tried to get to her. Julius adds that the Lee Wolves are known for sketchy things and can be planning something sinister against Seidukan. In the ring, the commentators announce the presence of Kirin and Saya. She mistakes Saya for Kirin because of her flat chest, and the crowd laughs mockingly at Saya's junior school-like stature. The two teams draw out their weapons, and the match begins officially. Kirin chooses the shorter opponent and engages in a close-range battle. After a few seconds of dodging on both ends, Kirin slices his badge, and the commentator goes crazy over how fast Kirin's battle went. The second commentator calls the attention of her partner to Saya, who is expertly blocking all the sword swings from her opponent. She gains the advantage of the battle and begins swinging her gun against him. The opponent leaps into the sky to deliver his self-thought final attack, but Saya blasts him onto the ground. The announcers declare Kirin and Saya the winners of the match, and the crowd goes crazy and cheers. In the next round, Ayato and Julius face two girls from Queenvale. Julius decides to take on the girls alone, since Ayato had done his part of his deal in the first match. The girls charge toward her and work collectively against Julius. Julius creates multiple fireballs and sends them after them. While dodging and blocking the fireballs, one of the girls twists her ankles, loses her balance, and gets hit hard enough for her badge to be broken. The second girl mocks Julius after dodging all of her fireballs, and Julia traps and surprises her with a firebomb that descends on her. The bomb blows up with a small blast, and the commentators announce Julius and Ayato as the winners of the match. While they await Kirin and Saya's return, Julius presents her packed lunch to Ayato and nervously asks him to pat her head, as he does to Kirin and Saya. After Ayato pats Julius fumbles around and opens a virtual screen to watch the ongoing matches. In the ring, Lester and his tagmate, Randy, are running around the ring while their opponents, Irene and Priscilla, watch calmly with their weapons on display. Lester and Randy, who had initially planned to drag out the fight to increase the side effects of Irene's heavy weapon, continue running around. Randy decides to test out what Priscilla is made of, but Irene hits her luxe against the ground and messes with the gravity under Randy's foot. Lester tries to attack Irene, but Irene blocks his ace and kicks him hard. Randy goes unconscious from the gravitational pull, and Lester drags himself up to his feet. Lester unleashes a special attack that sends Irene flying and hitting the arena walls. Irene gets on her feet, walks towards her sister, bites down her exposed neck, and sucks power from Priscilla's bloodstream. With a wicked smile, Irene explains to Lester that her weapon uses the wielder's blood to operate, but absorbing others' blood balances it out. Lester calls Irene a vampire, and Irene creates 3 dangerous-looking balls. She sends them towards Lester and increases the gravitational pull under Lester's feet. Lester dodges one of her balls and attempts to cut through the last 2 with his ace, but his axe shatters. Lester eventually succumbs to the pull and surrenders. In the arena, Claudia congratulates Ayato for making it to the finals. Ayato's device rings, and Kirin pops up on the virtual screen. She nervously informs Ayato that Saya has gotten lost. Ayato excuses himself from Claudia's presence and promises to make up for it. While Ayato walks around the city searching for Saya, Priscilla bumps into him, and a pack of vagabonds orders Ayato to hand over Priscilla. Ayato escapes with Priscilla from the vagabonds, and Priscilla thanks Ayato for helping her escape the drunk fools. Ayato asks Priscilla why a girl like her is being chased around the city by thugs. Priscilla explains that her sister had caused a commotion at the casino before nervously biting back on her words and shaping her vulgar sister into a good person stereotype. Priscilla mentions that her sister is on her way to save her, and Ayato freaks out internally. Irene leaps into the scene while threatening Ayato. Priscilla deactivates her regenerative blood in her sister and demands she stop making a fuss over nothing. Irene promises her sister she will be cool before asking Ayato what he is doing alone in an alley. Before Ayato can respond, he gets a call from Saya, and Saya informs him that she has found her way back to Kirin. Ayato suggests they link up at the burger joint before pointing out that he had come to the alley searching for a friend. Irene apologizes for her outburst and hands over a copy of the final match schedules. In the next scene, Irene barges into Le Wolf's student council president's office through the walls and demands to know why her sister wasn't protected per their initial agreement. The president sternly mentions that some people at the school have a hard time following his orders. Irene tosses his excuse out the window and demands why he didn't appoint men to guard her sister in her absence. The president sternly mentions that a few scratches mean nothing since Priscilla has regenerative blood. Irene loses her mind and attacks the president, but only manages to leave a scratch on his cheek. The president chuckles and reminds Irene who will benefit the least from his disappearance. He adds that his goons couldn't make a move because of Ayato's intervention, and Irene blames the president for making her indebted to Ayato. After Irene leaves, the president instructs his jump-scared assistant, Corona, to perform a reading for him. Corona, whose genitella is telling fortunes, does her reading and excitedly informs the president that she can see Irene and her sister's victory through her cards. In Seidukan, Ayato foolishly informs Julius about his dinner plans with Irene and her sister, and Julius scolds him for accepting to dine with the enemy. After a few seconds of boiling in disappointment and anger, Julius demands to be Ayato's +1. Priscilla welcomes the guests, and Irene rudely greets them. Over dinner, Irene confesses that she gambles crazily because she needs to repay the vast sum of money she borrowed from Dirk Eberwein, aka the president of LeWolf's student council. She continues that the contract she had signed restricted her participation in the Festa, and she cannot use Festa prize money to pay back her debt. Irene adds that she is under Dirk's order to destroy Ayato because the lux Ayato uses is a thorn in his side. Julius asks Irene why Dirk would go that far over a simple weapon, and Irene informs her that according to what she has heard from Dirk, he's seen someone else wield the same Orga Lux. Ayato suddenly recalls Claudia telling him about his sister's disappearance and connects the dots. He thanks Irene for the information, and Priscilla interrupts the serious atmosphere with a plate full of oven-baked seafood and mushroom paella. After dinner, Priscilla apologizes for her sister's lack of table manners and running mouth, but the leaving guests assure her the dinner was perfect. Priscilla mentions that, although she is grateful that her sister is fighting on her behalf and will happily do anything to help her, Irene transforms into a different scary-looking person whenever she wields her lux. Priscilla suddenly catches herself and apologizes for over-talking. On their way home, Julius and Ayato discuss Priscilla and Irene's predicament. They conclude to overlook whatever sob story they've heard and carry on as usual to the finals. After separating to go into their dorms, Ayato visits Claudia. Claudia suddenly goes berserk and attacks Ayato. Ayato barely contains Claudia's outburst, but luckily calls the real Claudia back to the surface. Claudia regains self-control and apologizes for going psycho mode at Ayato. When Ayato asks her what made her berserk, Claudia promises to tell him if he agrees to join her tag team in next year's Griffin Festa. Ayato accepts with the condition that Julius is also included. After Claudia agrees to include Julius, Claudia reveals she cannot expose her secrets to anyone outside her team. Her weapon flashes, and Claudia asks Ayato if he has experienced death before. Claudia continues by saying she has experienced death over 1,200 times, and that the weapon she wields demands for its wielder to experience their death every time they dream. Claudia adds that the past wielder of the weapon never got past using it for 3 days, but she had gotten used to the awful and different death experiences. When Ayato asks her why she puts up with the weapon, Claudia admits that she needs it to achieve her goal. Ayato asks Claudia what she thinks about Irene's Orga Lux, and Claudia admits that she believes Irene's Lix is dangerous. Ayato thanks Claudia for her help and excuses himself from the room when Claudia tries to make unethical passes at him. While Priscilla and her opposing team, Julius and Ayato, look at the red moon in high hopes, Irene smirks at the dead bodies lying in the pool of their blood. A few years ago, Priscilla was crushed by a large block of cement. She was taken to the hospital for immediate surgery and eventually got saved, but her surgery left her family in a huge debt. Dirk came to their rescue by offering to pay all their debts in exchange for Irene wielding a dangerous weapon and becoming his lackey. On the day of the finals, Priscilla wakes her sister from her dreams and reminds her that they will soon be called to the arena to fight. Irene sucks her blood to recharge her strength. The two girls embrace themselves one last time before walking to the arena. On the other hand, Ayato shares his battle tactics with Julius. While walking to the arena, Julius reminds Ayato that her goal is to win the competition regardless of the sob stories her opponents have. Julius adds that she will go with Ayato's tactics because she has to consider her partner's wish. Ayato thanks Julius for her graceful words, and the tag teams walk side by side into the ring. The crowd goes crazy as the commentators welcome the pairs to the ring. Julius activates her weapon, and Ayato temporarily breaks free from his constricting spell. Irene flashes her blood-sucking lux in her opponent's faces, and the announcers call the beginning of the match. Julius makes the first move. She creates multiple fire discs and sends them toward Irene, but Irene blocks them and counters Ayato's sword attack. Ayato and Irene engage in a close-range sword fight until Julius intervenes and shoots fire at Irene, but Irene escapes. Another shot is sent towards Irene's way, but Irene dodges it. Irene tries to increase the gravity pull under Ayato's feet, but Ayato leaps away and instructs Julius to activate their plan. Julius creates fire stars and sends them to Irene, but Irene protects herself with a barrier that shields her from the blasts. Irene boasts about her superiority before recharging herself with her sister's blood. While Irene feeds, Julius quietly informs Ayato that her preparations are complete and it is left to him to fulfill his end of the deal. After Irene tosses her weak sister to the ground, Ayato asks her if her way of fighting is right. Irene orders him to shut up before sending a gravity-manipulating attack her opponent's way. Luckily for Ayato and Julius, they flee the position before getting touched. Julius distracts Irene by shooting fireballs behind her. Ayato swoops in with his sword, and Irene immediately counters his attack. Ayato surprises her with an immediate follow-up attack and targets her Orga Lux. After a bit of a power struggle, Irene's Orga Lux sends Ayato flying towards the arena wall. Julius and Ayato regroup and prepare themselves for the multiple gravity balls Irene has created. Ayato instructs Julius to focus on protecting herself before using a special sword style to cut through every last gravity ball and charge toward Irene to distract her. Julius traps her with a location-based attack. Irene breaks Julius's attacks and mocks her right before another large location-based attack spreads out around the ring, and a large firebomb lands on her with a big blast. The smoke dies down, and Irene is seen still standing with a protective barrier. Priscilla tries to check on her sister, but Irene reveals a lost and evil face. When Ayato tries to save Priscilla, he and Julius get affected by the gravity attack. The pair watch Irene suck her sister until she gets unconscious. Ayato informs Julius that the Lux has taken over Irene's mind, and all that is left is for them to save Priscilla. Ayato drags himself slowly across the gravity-manipulated ring and tries to talk sense into Irene. Irene regains her senses for a few seconds before bursting out in screams and releasing gravity waves all over the ring. The gravity waves intensify, and Ayato feels his constricting spell lift. With a smirk, Ayato pushes through the waves and lands a powerful attack that knocks Irene's evil Orgacux from her hand. Ayato follows up with multiple attacks until he shatters it completely. After Ayato destroys Irene's Lux, Irene falls unconscious. After being declared the winner, Ayato falls to the ground in pain, and Dirk, who has been watching the match on his virtual TV, wonders why Ayato is screaming in pain. He deduces that Ayato must be suffering from a constricting spell. While looking out of his busted walls, Dirk complains about his pending deal with Ernesta and finding a new way to get rid of Ayato, just like he did to his sister. While presidents of other school councils smirk over Ayato reaching his limit, Ernesta and Camilla jubilate over their discovery. Camilla mentions that at this rate, one of their puppets can easily defeat Ayato, but Ernesta tells her not to assume just yet, before adding that a sudden twist of events must be coming. Priscilla wakes up in the infirmary, and Irene immediately apologizes for draining her. Irene informs Priscilla that they had lost the match, and Ayato had pulverized her Orga Lux like a madman. Priscilla asks if Dirk punished Irene in any way, and Irene assures her that Dirk did not. Priscilla asks her sister to teach her how to become strong enough to protect herself, and Irene readily agrees with a smile. On the other hand, Julius scolds Ayato for exposing his limited power to the world and almost destroying his body. Ayato reminds Julius of his promise to protect her, before mentioning that to protect her, it is high time to find a way to break the constricting seal. Julius holds Ayato's face and reminds him they're partners in everything. Just before Ayato and Julie's kiss, the rest of the girls burst into the room to ask about his well-being. While the girls make unethical passes and actions at Ayato, Yabuki eavesdrops and wonders how things will play out soon. After the jaw-dropping battle between Ayato and Irene, the Phoenix Festa continues. Chief, a battle-crazed little twig, and the student council president of G-Long School, drools over the amazing fight she witnessed between Ayato and Irene. When she asks one of her lackeys if it were possible to fix a match with Ayato's school, the lackey points out that Ayato's praised powers are limited. However, Chief insists that Ayato's limitations make him more interesting. A pair of evil twins interrupts the Chief's conversation by reporting that they don't plan to keep themselves from going all out and destroying their next opponent and comrade in the Phoenix Festa. Chief snarkily adds that Ayato's team may finish their opponents before they get the chance to face them. With their team strategy and Ayato's limitations exposed to general knowledge, all thanks to Irene and her sister, Julius and Ayato discuss new ways to pave the path to victory in their next match. In the Festa arena, the announcers mention the names of the qualified teams, and the crowd cheer in excitement. They introduce Ayato, Julius, and their opponents. The opponents warn Ayato that they will not consider taking it easy on him because of his injuries before jumping into the ring. Julius pulls her partner aside and marks the ground before reminding idiotic Ayato of their plan. With that out of the way, the two teams draw out their weapons, and the announcer calls the official beginning of the match. The opposing team takes offense, and the bald brother charges toward Ayato and rushes him with attacks, which he blocks and dodges successfully. Julius sends fire attacks at her opponent, but he dismisses them and runs towards her. Julius tries to use her sword against him, but he flips, tiptoes over her sword's tip and rushes towards his brother to face Ayato. Useless Ayato struggles to block the two brothers' attacks and secures a few direct hits. Obtuse Ayato moves towards the marked spot and signals to Julius to execute their plan. On command, Julius summons a straight line of hellish firewall, which divides the ring and the brothers into separate paths. With each of the brothers stuck on each side of the ring and their respective opponents, they, as expected, take offense and attack their opponents. Julius takes over and controls the fight, but her opponent soon realizes that most of her power is being used to maintain the firewall and decides to take advantage of the knowledge. He mocks Julius that the only way they can be defeated at this rate is if Julius and her partner manage to catch them off guard. Julius agrees that a surprise attack will indeed turn the hands of the battle. On the other hand, the bald brother commends Ayato for hanging on to his defense role when the role can easily be reversed if Ayato decides to go all out against him. The bald brother promises to end the battle honorably with a single attack, and Ayato discreetly walks closer to the marked spot. On the other side of the divided ring, Julius sustains a hit and releases fire into the open. Ayato understands the signal and gives in to his powers. A path suddenly opens up in the firewall, and the team of two exchange sides, and within the blink of an eye, Ayato and Julius unleash a surprise attack against the brother and split their opponent's badges into pieces. The crowd goes crazy as the firewall disappears and the announcers declare Ayato and Julius as the winner of the match. In the walkway, the loser brothers compliment Ayato and Julius for their exemplary performance before warning them that their tactics will not work against their next opponents. The washout brothers add that even though the evil twins are from their school, they play dirtier than mole rats. The evil twins walk into the scene with a dark aura surrounding them. They introduce themselves as Shenyun and Shenhua and mockingly apologize for the embarrassing failure of their comrades. Nincompoop Ayato immediately points out that there is nothing to apologize for about the brothers' fight. Still, the twins overlook Ayato's claims and promise to show him the world their pathetic comrades failed to show them. In the contestants' waiting room, Julius preaches to Ayato to consider using his wish to find his sister when they win the Festa. Dumb and idiotic Ayato points out that his sister must have her reasons for hiding, and he will not go out of his way to find her. Saya and Kirin reach out to Ayato that they have come to congratulate them on their victory with a guest for Julius. After letting the girls in, the crazy guest, in a maid's costume, calls on Julius, and Julius recognizes her visitor as Flora. With an extremely annoying tiny voice and an exaggerated attempt at cuteness, Flora introduces herself to the group as a palace maid in Julius's kingdom. After Julius narrates her purpose to the group, Ayato asks Flora to spill some tea on Julius's past, but Flora ends up praising like the kiss-ass she is. Flora abruptly gets up from her chair to show the group a few of her recorded memories of Julius during her time in the castle and occasional visits to the orphanage. Saya calls the group's attention to a picture of Julius bathing Flora, and Julius immediately reacts by disrupting the displayed pics and scolding Flora for keeping such embarrassing photos. Clueless Flora apologizes to Julius for her actions, and Ayato points out that the love Flora has for Julius is evident and massive. Flora chimes up and dreamily mentions that Julius is her role model, and she wishes to enroll in Saidukan and walk in Julius's footsteps. Julius tells her humble subject to wait 2 more years before enrollment, before assuring Flora that she will win the current Phoenix Festa and replenish their country's lack. Saya chips in and reminds Julius that she and Kirin will be the ones to win the competition. When Flora points out that Saya and Kirin are Julius's rivals, the girls share a look of annoyance and realization. In Ayato's dorm, he has a flashback to the conversation about his lost sister he had with Julius. He has another flashback to his discussion with Irene over their dinner and immediately rings her. Priscilla answers the call and begins thanking him for restoring her sister. Just before Priscilla invites Ayato for a second dinner, Irene shoves her out of the way and greets Ayato. Irene smartly points out that the moron, which is Ayato, has called to get in touch with Dirk, the president of Le Wolf, and Ayato confirms it. He asks Irene to tell Dirk he wishes to know about Haruka, his lost sister, and have a meeting with him. Irene agrees to Ayato's request, but not before warning him of how dangerous Dirk is. The following morning, Yabuki interrupts Ayato's slumber, and the two men begin discussing the match. Yabuki congratulates Ayato for qualifying for the quarterfinals, before warning him about their next opponents, aka the evil twins. While Yabuki reveals the information he has gathered on the twins, Julius rings Ayato and invites him to lunch on behalf of Flora. With a graceful smile, Ayato watches Flora enjoy her time in the restaurant Yabuki recommended a few hours prior. After fooling around for a while with a bowl of ice cream, Flora picks up her notepad to read the embarrassing questions she wrote down for Ayato. When Flora asks Ayato how far he has gone in his relationship with Julius, Julius flips and asks the little girl how she had come about such a disgusting question. Flora admits that the prince, or as Julius's elder brother, told her to investigate Julius's relationship with Ayato. In annoyance, Julius grabs the notepad and forbids desperate Flora from going further with her sinister questions. A random four-eyed girl nervously approaches Ayato's table and asks him to follow her. Four Eyes catches on to Ayato's confused expression and shyly introduces herself as Kashimaru Corona, the Wolf's student council secretary, before adding that Dirk awaits Ayato's presence. Julius frowns and wonders what the filth bag of a president is requesting her partner's audience, but Ayato assures her that he is the one who requested to see Dirk, and not the other way around. Julius insists on joining Ayato in his meeting, and Dirk instructs his jittery secretary to allow her. With that, Julius sends Flora home and follows Ayato and Corona into Dirk's car. While driving to their destination, Julius begins blaming Dirk for Irene's berserk outburst, but Ayato calms her down and points out that he did not request a meeting to discuss Irene. Dirk compliments Ayato's smartness before mentioning that he is in no way obligated to answer any of Ayato's questions. Ayato immediately deduces that Dirk did not agree to link up without having an agenda of his own. When Dirk confirms his conclusion, he gives Ayato the go-ahead to ask his questions. Ayato wastes no time and asks Dirk to spill all he knows about his sister, but Dirk informs him that he has only seen Haruka once during the eclipse. Julius gasps and explains that the eclipse was a bloody underground tournament with 0 rules in which contestants were declared winners if their opponent lost consciousness or became unalive. Dirk adds that Haruka was a contestant in the deadly game, and he remembers her losing her battle. Dirk continues that Haruka did not die in the contest before turning the table around and asking Ayato a question. He asks Ayato what Madiath Mesa, the man in charge of the Phoenix Festa, means to him. After realizing Ayato is clueless, the car stops, and Dirk orders the 2 string-headed idiots to get their asses out of his fine car. Julius frowns before asking Dirk how he figured out what restaurant they were in on such short notice, but Dirk refuses to answer her silly question and drops them off. In the car, Corona blabs about the little girl she saw with Julius at the restaurant, and Dirk demands to know every detail about her. A few years ago, little Saya walked up to Ayato after watching him train with his sister. Ayato nervously asks Saya if she watched his sister beat his ass, before pointing out that her idea of shouting out the name of fight moves is embarrassing. Saya chips in that shouting the name of one's next move is cooler than fighting silently, and Ayato needs to get used to it. Ayato pulls out a favor ticket and asks Saya to help him defeat his sister. Fast forward to the present, Ayato finds himself in the training room with Julius as his training buddy. Julius knocks Ayato and his empty head down with her fire move, and asks her sparring partner why he seems disconnected from reality. After apologizing to Julius for being inactive, Ayato walks to the school's fountain. By the fountain, he has a flashback to his conversation with Dirk. Julius walks up to Ayato and snaps him out of his traveling thoughts. She reminds him that he had told her that he wouldn't go out of his way to find his sister, before asking him if he is scared to discover the reason why his sister vanished after putting a seal on him. Julius asks again if Ayato is scared to find out that his sister has abandoned him, and Ayato agrees. At the dorm, a sound on the balcony disrupts Ayato's thoughts. He walks slowly to the balcony and freaks out when he sees Saya pop out from the ceiling. After settling in Ayato's room, Saya asks her dumb friend why he looks bothered, before mentioning that Julius had resorted to sending her to him. Saya asks her idiot friend if he thinks Haruka abandoned him, and watches Ayato's eyes get filled up with sadness. Saya grabs Ayato's face, calls him a dummy, and assures him that there is no way his sister disappeared without a tangible reason. Saya continues that there might be a possibility that Haruka is off the radar because she doesn't have a way of contacting him. Saya tells Ayato to man up instead of losing himself to useless thoughts. Saya pulls out the favor ticket Ayato gave her many years ago and reminds him of their failed attempt to defeat Haruka. She encourages Ayato to reach out to his sister and to cultivate the habit of relying on others when he finds himself in trouble. The following day, after Julius discusses her battle strategy with Ayato, the announcer introduces the fighters of the day. The evil twins mock their opponents for showing up to the match like nerve-full fools after exposing their shortcomings and limitations 2 fights ago. One of the twins spitefully asks Julius if she has come up with another strategy. With a stern look, Ayato declares that losing is not an option for them, and the evil twins admit that they're looking forward to kicking their high school asses. When Ayato foolishly releases his seal temporarily, Julius draws out her weapon the evil twins take their stance, and the announcer calls the official beginning of the match. Ayato immediately charges towards Shenhua, but Shenhua dodges his sword attack. When Julius tries to fight Shenyun releases a smokescreen, but the two immediately realize that the smokescreen is an illusion. The crowd grows angry over not being able to see through the smokescreen, and Shenyun dissolves it. With a full minute gone and 4 minutes left before Ayato's constriction manifests, Ayato charges towards Shenyun, but Shenyun makes 4 shadow replications, while Shenhua turns invisible. Shenyun reveals spell cards in his fingers, and charges towards Ayato with his replicants. Ayato manages to take a few of his illusioned replications down, but unfortunately gets touched by Shenyun's explosive spell card. Julius tries to check on her partner, but Shenhua appears from thin air and hits her with an explosive spell card. After Ayao catches Julius, the two decide to deal with Shenyun first. Shenyun blocks Ayato's miserable attempt to take him down, and reminds them that the smokescreen was used to create tags all over the ring. Julius declares that she will burn down the tags, but Shenhua appears out of thin air and strikes Julius with her Thunder spell card. After taking out all of Shenyun's shadow replicants, the 5-minute mark reaches, and Ayato feels his constricting curse take action and push him to the ground. Shenyun places his feet on Ayato's head in mockery and asks him how it feels to lose. However, Ayato tricks the trickster by cutting through his badge with a surprise swing of his sword. Shenyun proves he is the king of tricks when he emerges from the air and his clone falls to the ground. He mocks Ayato before covering him in a dome of spell cards. After going through hell in the dome, Julius saves Ayato from Shenyun's attempt to finish him and apologizes for not getting through to him sooner. Julius yaps some shit about protection, and Ayato feels motivated and awakened. When the evil twins approach them, Ayato thanks Julius for his sudden awakening. Almighty Ayato smiles and asks Julius to buy him some time while he meditates and collects himself. Julius agrees to her partner's request, not before stating that she won't be able to hold the twins off for long. While meditating, Ayato feels his constricted self grab a ball of light in the distance. Julius draws out her weapon, and the evil twins mock her for trying to take them both without any assistance from her useless, spent-out partner. Shenhua goes invisible, but Julius smartly engulfs the ring floor with fire and simultaneously destroys the invisible tags while chasing the twins into far proximity. After mocking Julius for not being powerful enough to fight them off and destroy the tags while protecting her deadweight partner, Shenyun unleashes hundreds of spell cards in the air. After blocking a few ice attacks, Julius decides to concentrate and allow the illusions in ice form to pass through her. When Shenyun realizes Julius's trick, he tricks her into losing focus and getting hit by a giant block of pointy ice. The fire on the ground disappears, and Shenhua kicks Julius exactly where the ice hit her and mocks her pain. Meanwhile, Ayato is still meditating and daydreaming about a style of fighting his sister taught him many years ago. Julius asks Shenhua why she didn't break her badge, and Shenhua sinisterly claims that her aim was off. Julius swears to make Shenhua regret not ending the fight before creating a large fireball above which catches Shenhua off guard. Unfortunately for Julius, Shenyun saves his sister from the fire, mocks Julius's failed attempt, and scolds Shenhua over being careless. Shenyun holds Julius captive with a spell card and begins raining her with explosive cards at every angle except her school badge. As Shenyun is about to finish off Julius, Ayato unlocks his seal and cuts through the spell cards like butter. After saving Julius, Ayato explains that he has broken off the second layer of his constricting seal and has extended his power outburst from 5 minutes to over an hour. When Julius falls into exhaustion, Ayato faces the evil twin, Shenyun. Ayato concentrates and fishes out the positions of the tags before cutting through them in split seconds while walking towards Shenyun. In annoyance, Shenyun tries to attack Ayato with explosive cards, but emerges from the smoke unharmed and takes down Shenhua almost immediately. Shenyun goes crazy and unleashes all his spell tags into an explosive fireball, makes several shadow replications, and tries to attack Julius with a thunder tag. Ayato swiftly blocks the thunder from reaching Julius before elongating his sword and cutting through all the fireballs in 2 sword swings. In annoyance, Ayato charges towards Shenyun and lands a heavy punch against him that renders him unconscious. The crowd cheers as the announcer announces Ayato and Julius as the winners of the match. Flora and Claudia congratulate Pipsqueak, Ayato, and Julius on their win in the waiting room. Claudia inappropriately invites Ayato to her room before trying to steal him away. Julius drags Ayato, and Flora is forced to watch the 2 grown ladies fight over spending time with a twig. In another waiting room, Saya tells Kirin a story about how her father lost most of his body in a work accident and became hooked up to a nerve center in his workshop. When Kirin tries to show empathy, Saya asks her not to, before adding that Camilla is partially right because her father makes guns to complement her style. Saya continues to say that acceptance will give room for anyone to talk down on her father's work. Before their match, Camilla and her friend link up with Saya to give further criticism about Saya's gun, and Saya promises to prove Camilla wrong by defeating her puppets. Camilla agrees to take back her words if the girls defeat their puppets. In the ring, the puppets give their opponents a 1-minute grace as usual, and Kirin draws out her weapon. The male puppet, aka ARD, informs Kirin that if she intends to breach his defensive barrier, she should think of another approach, but Kirin cuts through his speech and asks him to try her. After a few failed attempts, Kirin adjusts her approach, lands a hit on ARD, and asks him to fight fairly. Kirin promises to strike him down if he doesn't reciprocate the efforts, and ARD is forced to retaliate. ARD jokingly admits defeat and asks Kirin to explain how she got past his barriers. Kirin explains that she used the advantage of his predicted data and lack of combat experience against him. RMC, aka the female puppet, pulls out her weapon and asks Kirin why she has yet to attack. Kirin informs her that she will only attack when the puppets decide to go all out. After landing an actual hit on the RMC switches to battle mode. While the battle between Seidukan students and Alicant's puppets is ongoing, a masked man from the Wolf School kidnaps Flora. In the ring, when the RMC compliments Saya's hit and praises her gun, Saya butts in and tells her how predicting her opponent's moves are. In annoyance, the puppet tosses her weapon, begins levitating, and declares to fight Saya at full capacity. In the air, RMC moves at the speed of light in an attempt to mess with Saya's aim, but Saya traces her next move and fires at her. RMC blocks Saya's hit with a secret weapon and emerges from the smoke untouched. RMC and Saya aim their weapon at each other and unleash their ammo simultaneously. While Saya and RMC battle in the air, Kirin and ARD settle their scores on land. Kirin attacks the puppet vigorously, before noting that the more he blocks her sword swings, the more he registers and inputs acquired data to determine her next move. The puppet decides to shift the battle roles by landing a successful counterattack against Kirin. After Kirin admits she needs more training to conquer an opponent as strong as the puppet thanks her for allowing him to input her battle data before calling on his partner to unveil their secret move. RMC rudely refuses and reminds him that it is up to her to decide when and where they use their combo attack. After dodging countless ammo attacks from RMC, Saya unleashes a secret weapon, and RMC agrees to engage in a power struggle. With RMC's weapon set to maximum and Saya's badass sniper increased to full burst, the two opponents release fire at each other simultaneously. After a bit of power struggle, Saya's ammo overthrows RMC's, and RMC is forced to create a barrier to protect herself from the blast. When Kirin runs to Saya to apologize for her incompetence, RMC turns to ARD and reluctantly agrees to execute their combo move. The two puppets levitate into the air, and RMC surrenders her armor to ARD to complete the body modification process. Saya and Kirin must be goners at this point. While Camilla and her friend watch in amusement, the modified puppet boasts about his new looks, and Saya admits he looks cool. The puppet relays the first attack and blows the girls into the distance. The partially smart girls immediately deduce that the body merge must be because ARD lacks somewhere. To fish out ARD's weak point, Saya asks Kirin to hold ARD off while she sorts things out. Kirin charges towards ARD as planned and tries to use her speed advantage to land a blow, but ARD sees through her tricks and hits her with his gigantic hammer. Saya runs to check on her partner, but Kirin assures her she is fine and they should focus on their opponent. ARD accumulates his power, compliments the girls' battle skills, and promises to destroy them. When Saya notices Kirin is weak, she instructs her to stay behind her. Saya deduces that ARD lags a bit and prepares her weapon. Immediately, ARD unleashes his hammer attack. Badass Saya fires her weapon on full burst. After barely withstanding the blast effect of the collision, Saya deactivates her suit and pulls out another smaller weapon. ARD pays his respects to the girls before releasing another hammer attack. Ayato and Julius, who are watching the fight through a screen, hear a blast and rush to Kirin's waiting room to check on the girls. The girls apologize for their pathetic fight, but Julius promises to avenge their honor in the final. Says points out that Julius must be delusional to think they stand a chance against the puppets, and unsurprisingly, Julius agrees to be delusional enough to make things work. Claudia walks into the room to share words of encouragement with Kirin and Saya, and the group begins to notice Flora's absence. While Dirk rings Camilla and Ernesta to propose a partnership between the two schools, Flora's captor runs a call to Ayato and his friends. He threatens them to do as he says if they want Flora back in one piece. The culprit asks Ayato to apply an emergency seal on his Cervaresta Ogre Lux and refrain from reaching out to the police or butting out of the Festa. After the call ends, Claudia explains that applying an emergency seal on a Lux is equivalent to shutting it down for good. Despite Julius's opinion, Saya suggests they ignore the culprit's demands and figure out a way to rescue Flora. Claudia steps forward with a plan, and the group agrees to do their assigned parts. Claudia instructs Ayato to seal a fake Lux to trick the culprit during the match, while she uses her affluence to slow down the confirmation of Ayato's emergency seal. She analyzes all the obvious details and predicts the moves of Dirk and his no-good subordinates. Claudia proposes to hold off any encounter until after the closing ceremony of the match the following day, while Kirin and Saya snoop into LeWolf's premises to save Flora. Meanwhile, a hired guard punishes Flora for attempting to escape captivity. At night, while Kirin and Saya comb through a maze of prisons in the LeWolf premises, the announcer introduces the contestants into the ring. Before the beginning of the match, Ayato assures Julius that they will qualify for the finals and also rescue Flora with Kirin and Saya's help. The two teams draw out their weapons, and the announcer calls the beginning of the semi-final. Julius casts a large fireball on the older opponent, who will be referred to as Lemus, and Lemus emerges from the fire unscathed and fully armored. Lemus hits the ground, summons an armored horse, and mounts it. Ayato watches Julius dodge Lemus's spear attack, but his opponent calls his attention back to him. Ayato's opponent, who we shall refer to as Smalley in this video, notices Ayato's usual Cerveresta Ogre Lux is missing, and wonders if it is Ayato's way of looking down on their abilities, but Ayato apologizes that he cannot use his Lux for some private reasons. Smalley makes the first mode, Ayato blocks, and Smalley does a counterattack. After gauging each other's output, the two opponents continue their close-range sword fight. Ayato realizes Smalley's sword has a lighter resolve compared to his, and decides to use it against him. Ayato makes a tricky counterattack and cuts through Smalley's badge in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Julius aims fire at Lemus's armor-covered badgie, but is unable to penetrate through his thick metal armor. Julius dodges Lemus's spear attack and creates a firewall to protect herself from Lemus's attack. But when Lemus dives through the firewall, Julius counters his movement and barely dodges the tip of his spear. Julius retakes her stance and bombards Lemus with multiple fire attacks. After a few seconds, Lemus falls onto the ground from his horse due to overheating. His armor dissolves into thin and reveals a man who can easily be mistaken as a can of microwaved baked beans. Julius commends his perseverance before breaking the school badge off the sweaty man's chest. The announcer declares Ayato and Julius the winners of the match, and Ayato immediately rings Saya to get updated. Saya explains that their search through the prison maze has been futile so far, and Ayato urges them to send the maze map to him so that he can join the search. The two girls feel bad about the possibility of Ayato fighting the puppets without his Cerverisa Lux, and immediately decide to do whatever they can to find Flora before the finals. While Julius and Ayato discuss how to find Flora, Yabuki barges into the room, and the pair explains their situation to him. Yabuki agrees to help them find Flora anyhow he can despite his obvious fear and discomfort. Ayato discreetly links up with Irene, and Irene explains that although she cannot tell Ayato where exactly LeWolf is keeping Flora, she can theorize the whole kidnapping. Irene draws out a conclusion and mentions the most likely hideout LeWolf's kidnapper might be hiding. In Alicante Laboratory, Ernesta notices her partner's sulky mood. She points out that judging by her mood, it is evident that they have separate goals. Ernesta blurts that her goal is to create puppets with willpower and human features, while Camilla's is to create an unrealistic weapon for general use. Camilla agrees and takes Ernesta down memory lane to the first day they met when she woke up in a hospital after some armed men raided her parents' home and destroyed everyone. Camilla reminds Ernesta that she swore to give Ernesta half of her life after she replaced her missing body parts with puppet parts. Camilla adds that putting her devotion aside, Ernesta's puppets are extremely reckless, but Ernesta points out that her masterpieces are anything but reckless. She continues that she will do whatever it takes to win and secure a possible enrollment of her puppets into the school. ARD suddenly wakes and asks Ernesta to leave his battle scars untouched as a token of victory and evidence of battle growth. Camilla and Ernesta are surprised that their puppets can recognize self-growth, and RMC awakes to request another favor. She informs that about the discomfort during the merging before asking her to adjust her exposure during their merge, but Ernesta sinisterly informs her it is impossible to adjust it before the finals. A group of men notice Ayato sniffing around the area and begin to chase him into the dark alleys. Ayato takes a turn in an attempt to throw the LeWolf men off his scent, but is instead faced with the kidnappers standing beside one LeWolf signatory car. The kidnappers almost see through Ayato's poor attempt at a disguise, but a young girl pops out from nowhere and offers to help Ayato escape from his LeWolf oppressors. Ayato asks the strange girl if she knows him, and the girl admits that she has never seen him before. When the LeWolf men begin approaching Ayato, the the strange girl grabs his hand and leads him through the dark street. After the strange girl leads Ayato into a secure area, she asks him what business he has with the Lee Wolf men. When she notices Ayato's negligence in speaking, she assures him that it doesn't matter if he decides not to tell her. The strange girl advises Ayato to wait for some time before going back into the street. Ayato thanks his savior for her help, and the strange girl surprisingly mentions Ayato's full name. Ayato, who could have sworn on his sister's life that he had never introduced himself to the strange girl, backs up in concern, and the girl applauds him for his swift reflexes. Ayato asks the girl how she knows who he is, and the girl calmly tells him that not only is he Festa popular, but he also did a whack job at disguising himself Clark Kent style. While the girl explains that she helped him out of her kind heart, a scumbag emerges from the dark and threatens to capture Ayato. The strange girl mocks the entrance of the scumbag, and the scumbag turns his attention to her, like the filthy creep that he is. The oddly unbothered girl identifies the scumbag as a former student of Geelong School, and the scumbag joyfully charges towards her. Ayato butts into the fight to block the scumbag's attack, but the scumbag tosses him aside. The scumbag begins throwing uncalculated attacks at the strange girl, but the strange girl calmly dodges every swing of her attacker. The scumbag gets frustrated with his failed attempts and begins fighting blindingly. The girl weaves his attacks again and sends him flying and crashing into a wall with a small kick to his foot. After knocking down the scumbag, the girl agrees to help Ayato if he follows her to a rooftop. After complimenting Ayato's selflessness and team effort, the girl asks for details of the missing person. With a little bit of hesitation, Ayato describes Flora, and the girl asks Ayato to keep their encounter a secret before using her search powers to locate Flora. The strange girl's brown hair suddenly turns white, and Ayato recognizes her as Sylvia Lineheim, Queenvale Girls Academy Rank 1. Sylvia starts singing in like an English princess and combing through the city with her beautiful voice-activated powers. Sylvia traces Flora to the northern part of the area. When Sylvia excuses herself, Ayato thanks her and asks for her contact. Sylvia gives Ayato her contact and wishes him good luck before skipping out of the scene. Moments later, Ayato informs the group of Flora's whereabouts and leaves out the part about meeting Sylvia. Saya insists that Ayato and Julius should leave the rest of the work to them and focus on winning their finals. And when Julius tries to oppose, Yabuki chips in and convinces her. Saya assures Ayato that they will find Flora before the end of the final match and send a signal to them when it is all clear to use the Servaresta. Dirk brings his hired kidnapper to inform him that his men reported a suspicious man snooping around the area the night before. When the hired culprit asks what to do if an invasion occurs, Dirk tells him to use the hostage as he wishes. Whilst on the call, the culprit senses the presence of intruders from a distance and reports to his employers. On the other hand, Yabuki hacks the entrance of an abandoned building and leads the girls inside. A dark entity appears from the shadows and tries to attack the group of three, but Kirin steps forward and cuts it down. A multitude of dark entities rise from the ground and approach the three students slowly. When the entities increase their speed, Saya picks up her gun and guns down as many as she can. While Saya fires away, Yabuki yaps around and is barely able to dodge the entity's attacks. Saya calls on Kirin to cover her, and when Kirin begins running toward her, she feels her weak left leg snap, but she overlooks it and cuts down the entities. Saya activates her badass sniper and obliterates all the entities. Saya feels her hands quiver and lies that she feels okay. When Yabuki calls the girl's attention to the risen dark entities, Lester pops out from nowhere and accuses Yabuki of blackmailing him into helping them out. The girls ignore Lester's rant and exit the room to proceed with their plans. Yabuki slips out of the scene to execute his hidden plan. While Lester battles the dark entities and the girls search through the building for Flora, the announcer introduces the final contestants into the ring. ARD asks Ayato to make their fight more enjoyable than Saya's, but Ayato sternly tells him that he is not interested in amusing his opponents, and all he cares about is securing victory. Ernesta watches in pride and amusement as her puppets declare their intent and hope for the match. Little B must be swimming in her proud mommy moment. Ayato and Julius jubilate over the fact that their opponents are boxes of metal junk and they can go all out without caring about the loss of lives. The announcer notices Ayato's plain sword and announces his change in weaponry and sudden request for an emergency seal over his Servaresta Ogre Lux. After a breathtaking countdown, the announcer calls the beginning of the final Phoenix Festa match and the crowd goes berserk. Ayato and Julia immediately run toward ARD to land their first attack. After Ayato unleashes his 9 sword swings and watches ARD block the first, second, 3rd, all the way to the 9th attacks, Julius sends fire attacks towards ARD. RMC butts into the fight and complains like a little puppy about being left out of the match. The team of 2 executes their previous plan by making Julius fight ARD and Ayato, playing Julius's protector while predicting RMC's moves. Julius asks for Ayato's intervention, and Ayato distracts ARD long enough for Julius to land a direct fire attack while dodging RMC's ammo. Ayato blocks RMC, and Julius successfully leads ADD into a trap circle. She engulfs ARD in fire, but ARD dissolves the fire without a problem. Disappointed about their failure, Ayato and Julius regroup to discuss a different tactic to protect themselves from opponents' attacks during the merge. RMC unleashes a large firework-like attack and surrenders her attributes to her partner. Ayato runs into the fireworks and cuts RMC's exposed badge in pieces a second after the merge. RMC apologizes to her partner for losing her guard before asking ARD to do whatever he can to ensure their victory. On the other hand, Kirin agrees to rescue Flora, while Saya stays hidden in case of surprise attacks. While Kirin is trying to set protesting Flora loose, the culprit emerges in the shadows and unleashes a protective entity against Flora. Kirin immediately deduces that the culprit specializes in shadow manipulation and must be hiding in an optimal position to exercise his powers. When Kirin cuts through the not-so-random shadow spikes, the culprit reveals himself. He holds Flora in a compromising position and promises to unalive her if Kirin moves funny. The culprit orders Kirin to drop her weapon, but Saya lands a surprise attack on him, which leads to the release of Flora. While Kirin leads Flora out, the culprit strikes her down with a shadow spike, but Saya intervenes before the culprit bombards Kirin with follow-up attacks. Flora runs to Saya, and the culprit tries to run a sneak attack on Kirin, but Kirin luckily blocks him. While countering the culprit's attacks, Kirin registers that her opponent is strong. The culprit declares the end of the fight, disappears, reappears in an unexpected position like the trickster that he is, and lands an actual hit against Kirin. When Saya tries to intervene, the crafty culprit traps her and Flora to the wall and orders the girls to stay put. The culprit points out that his spike cut through a vital spot, and Kirin will die if she doesn't seek treatment immediately, but Kirin refuses, draws in her sword, like the glorified champion that she is, and retakes a different battle stance. Kirin uses some sort of visual hypnosis to weaken the culprit Mangekyu Sharingan style before slicing through both of his hands. When the culprit mocks Kirin for her poor attempts at defeating him, Saya aims her badass sniper toward him and hits the MF directly. Meanwhile, Ayato and Julia are struggling to keep up with their merged opponent, and ARD boasts about his superiority. He mocks his human opponents by teasing them with a hammer attack and reminding them the match will be over when he decides it is. He tosses his hammer at the helpless Ayato and Julius continuously before creating a barrier to trap them in place for direct hits from his hammer attacks. ARD pulls out his hammer and tosses it towards the trapped Ayato and Julius, but Julius counters it with her fire powers and somehow manages to block the hammer from bestowing full damage upon them. Upon seeing Julius still standing her ground after the collision, ARD compliments her stamina. Claudia overtakes the announcer's microphone against their will to inform Ayato and Julius about Flora's safety from nowhere. After Julius and Ayato laugh in relief, Ayato finally activates his Servaresta Ogrelux and cuts through ARD's hammer like butter. The puppet, the crowd, Ernesta and Camilla watch in shock and amusement as Ayato declares the beginning of their counterattack. Ayato cries out in his battle voice foolishly as he charges towards ARD. ARD blocks Ayato's attack with his magically rejuvenated hammerhead, and the two engage in a swift and continuous battle. After a short while of weapon swinging, Julius feels left out of the fight and calls ARD's attention. The second ARD turns, he is met with Julius's glorified fire attack. While ARD is distracted, Ayato aims at him with his sword from behind, but ARD somehow manages to counter the two attacks simultaneously. ARD declares the fight is far from over, shouts into the atmosphere, and engulfs the ring in a blue neon light. In the contestants' private room, Camilla chastises Ernesta to shut down ARD, who has gone berserk in the ring, but Ernesta refuses to intervene and claims there is nothing she can do, before adding that she has faith that Ayato and his partner are fit to take the out-of-control puppet down. In the ring, Julius and Ayato realize that ARD is rampaging out of control, just like Irene did a few days ago. The blue neon light suddenly disappears, and ARD boasts about discovering his true power. Immediately, Julius deduces that ARD can control his power surge. ARD dives toward them and swings his hammer. Julius activates her location attack and rains fire on him, but ARD counters it with a nuclear-like explosion. Injured Julius walks towards Ayato and falls to the ground like a useless weakling. When Ayato complains about not being able to match ARD's speed, Julius recalls a lesson Claudia explained to her, that the Servaresta can take the form of anything the wielder imagines. She tells Ayato to focus on an image of his ideal Servaresta and channel his energy on his Servaresta while she backs him up with her energy. After the deed is done, Julius falls to the ground and leaves the rest of the job to Ayato. ARD, who has been conveniently waiting for the show, begins walking towards Ayato with his hammer. The two opponents walk towards each other, while the audience watches in curiosity. Ayato strikes first and lands a hit on ARD. ARD counters Ayato's next hit and sends his attack. Ayato dodges ARD's hit and other follow-up attacks while gliding through the rocks in the air before landing a final powerful direct blow on ARD. The crowd grows silent, and the sound of a broken badge fills the stadium. ARD has been defeated. The announcer grabs her microphone and declares Ayato and Julius as the winners of the Phoenix Festa. The crowd goes crazy. Ernesta accepts defeat gracefully, and ARD laughs at his failure, while Julius rushes over to her partner to congratulate him. Mariath Mesa, the president of the Festa committee, gives accolades to the winners of the Festa before granting Ayato a prize. On the other hand, in an underground sewage system, Werner, Flora's kidnapper, attacks a strange man with a scared face who has come to finish him off. Meanwhile, in Asterisk, Claudia and Saya congratulate Ayato, but Ayato tells them that winning would not have been possible without their help. Saya begins mentioning the people involved in saving Flora, and Ayato suddenly realizes that Yabuki is missing. Lester sternly says that Yabuki fled the scene immediately after the girls went to rescue Flora. In the sewage, Werner suddenly hears a voice from behind and feels a sharp weapon cut through his stomach flesh. Werner falls into the liquid waste, and Yabuki complains about Werner destroying the new coat he put on his illusioned figure. Saya apologizes for not capturing the kidnapper, and Lester reluctantly congratulates Ayato before storming off. Camilla and RMC approach the group to ask Saya for a rematch. Camilla explains that even though Saya's weapons were better than RMC's, they lost because the fused puppets are equivalent to an ogre lux, and a mere weapon is nothing next to an ogre lux. Saya's expression changes, and she promises to win the rematch. In a dark room, Dirk rings Ernesta to inform her that they couldn't find any manadite, aka the overly powered and dangerous ogre lux, for her third semi-finished puppet. Ernesta takes the news as calmly as a psychopath would, and wonders what her next step will be. Ayato, Claudia, and Saya pay a visit to Kirin in the hospital. After a short while, Julius walks into the room and calls on Flora to show her face. Flora walks in shyly and dominates the room with her annoying voice. She apologizes for causing them trouble, bursts into tears, and hugs Julius for comfort. Outside the hospital room, Julius and Ayato grab a can of drink each. They thank one another for their collected efforts and perseverance. The winning team of two share a toast to celebrate their success. Ayato and the girls discuss their winter break plans in the cafeteria. Julius disrupts everyone's plans by revealing she got the group a plane ticket to her kingdom, aka Lisultania, for the holidays. Fast forward to the airport in Europe, Flora's annoying voice rings through their ears again as she greets the guests and ushers them into the car. On their way to the palace, the citizens of the kingdom turn the street into a welcome parade for their princess and her friends to celebrate their success in the Phoenix Festa. In the palace, Julius barges into her brother's room to chastise him for the unnecessary grand entry, but Julius's brother retorts that he wanted to congratulate them on the trip before introducing himself as Jolbert, the king of the country. He turns his gaze to the strange-looking lady beside him and introduces her as his wife, Maria. After giving some responses to his obnoxious sister's rant, Jolbert mentions he would like to discuss with the winners of the Festa before adding that he has scheduled a banquet on their behalf for the following night. While having a tour around the castle, Julius tells Ayato about the history of Lisultania and how much of a puppet state it is. She points out that her country relies greatly on the influence of the Integrated Enterprise Foundation, and her ultimate wish is to save her country from their influence. At night, Flora's voice strikes a nerve in Ayato's brain. She informs Ayato that Saya is missing, and Ayato agrees to search for her. Ayato finds Saya on the roof and walks up to her. Saya looks at Ayato vulnerably and apologizes for cutting off communication a few months after moving because she couldn't bear the pain of their limited communication. She apologizes for not being there for him when his sister went missing like a real friend would. Finally, Saya asks Ayato to rely on her moving forward before adding that she will always be there for him. Ayato thanks Saya and agrees to rely on her in the future. Over dinner, Claudia invites the group to join her team in the upcoming Festa, titled the Grips Festa. Claudia reminds Ayato that he promised to join if Julius joins, before turning to Julius for a response. Julius asks Claudia why she is obsessed with the Grips Festa when she could have easily advanced in the past Festa. Claudia points out that winning the past Festa might have been impossible, and she only has a chance at the Grips if her teammates are reliable. Claudia promises to go into details if the group joins her team. Claudia admits that her powers are not fit for individual battle, and she is guaranteed a higher shot at winning against the other powerful team if she has them fighting by her side. Julius, like the self-appointed queen of the group, accepts Claudia's offer, while the rest follow behind. After dressing up like a corporate gentleman and surrendering his weapon to Flora, Ayato visits the girls' room and is shocked to see how stunning each of them is in their respective dinner gowns. After exchanging compliments and a few nervous glances, Ayato is appointed to escort Julius to the banquet. At the banquet, Julius offers Ayato a drink to calm his nervous nerves before complaining about her brother being a figurehead for the Integrated Enterprise Foundation. She explains that the foundation appointed several concubines for her brother, and Claudia's father is in charge of their region. When Ayato asks who Claudia's father is, Julius informs him that her father is too good of a man to grow up the ladder of the foundation, unlike his powerful wife. Julius excuses herself from their conversation when her brother calls for her, and Claudia eyes Ayato suspiciously. Ayato walks around the room and finds Kirin having a hard time with the people questioning her about her experience in the Festa. Ayato approaches the little crowd and rescues Kirin. While advancing into the room, Kirin suddenly begins spilling her insecurities, but Ayato tries his best to assure her she isn't lesser in any way compared to the other girls. Kirin forces Ayato to hold her arm like an escort, and Saya pops up from nowhere and grabs Ayato's second arm. While the two girls continue the arm of war, a manly voice suddenly laughs at the scene and points out that the reaction of the girls is just given that Ayato won the Festa. The man asks Ayato if he is interested in joining the Grips Festa, as the rumors say, but Ayato lies that he is undecided for the time being. The man's glasses suddenly shine as he warns Ayato against joining Claudia's team. Ayato and the girls instantly shift back in alertness to the man when the man threatens to take physical action if Ayato insists on joining Claudia's team. The strange man summons a giant mixed breed of animals and scatters the whole party. While the banquet guests are running for dear lives, the animal tries to crush Kirin. Saya skips into the air, pulls out her hidden gun, and aims at the creature. The rest of the girls rush into the scene after the creature gets a direct hit from Saya's gun. Ayato jumps into the fields to face the creature alone, unlocks his constriction, and leaps into the air. The creature shoots out its snake head, and Ayato kicks it to the ground. Ayato goes under, by the side, and above, to land powerful kicks on the creator, and after kicking it to the ground, Julius and Saya bombard it collectively with their powers, while Claudia watches with a strange expression. From a distance, the strange man watches Ayato and his friends defeat his chimera without weapons, and complains about how difficult it will be to get rid of Ayato. The strange man suddenly starts laughing maniacally, while disappearing into the nightlight. The following morning, after Joelbert informs the group that the attacker's name is Gustave Malraux, an internationally wanted criminal, Claudia adds that the attacker is a known terrorist. Kirin points out that judging from the incident, it was clear that the culprit sounded like he was carrying out someone's request. Joelbert foolishly asks the group how they feel about the police proposal to put them under protection, and Claudia fondly points out that neither of them needs protection. While the group turns around to take their leave, Joelbert reminds Ayato and his sister of his request to have a private meeting with them the previous day. Over tea, Joelbert bluntly asks Ayato to marry Julius to avoid the Integrated Enterprise Foundation's decision to marry her off for their convenience like himself. After calming down from her nervous rant, Julius asks her brother why he suddenly wants her to get married, and Joelbert explains that because she won't be the Phoenix Festa, she has become valuable in the eyes of the Foundation, and it will be more convenient on their path if Julius marries Ayato instead of their proposed suitor. Ayato speaks up that he doesn't wish to be the one to bind Julius to the country by marrying her, and Joelbert accepts Ayato's respectful neglect before asking if Ayato would agree to bind Julius to the country if it is in her desires. Julius and Ayato blush and nervously fumble the conversation before excusing themselves. Joelbert calls them back and proceeds to his second request. Joelbert calmly asks Julius not to compete in the Grips Festa to avoid outshining his glory. After Julius refuses and storms out of the room, Joelbert explains to Ayato that the reason he was appointed king was because he was a fool with no intention in politics and would readily obey the Integrated Enterprise Foundation's request. Joelbert adds that if Julius were to win the Grips Festa, she could end up with more influence than him, and the Foundation would overthrow him and fix Julius as the queen. Gilbert continues that knowing Julius's behavior, she will try to change the country and help the poor, but she will end up suffering in the hands of the real rulers of the country. Gilbert gives off a small smile before asking Ayato if he will try to convince Julius, but Ayato refuses. Gilbert sighs and instructs Ayato to check on Julius at the orphanage. Meanwhile, Claudia is making a phone call to a strange man while secretly eyeing Ayato. In the orphanage, Ayato and Julius meet with the orphanage's manager, Sister Teresa. After a short while, the other nuns rush into the room to greet Julius, and Ayato senses that most of the nuns in the orphanage are Genestella. After the nuns leave, Teresa explains that all 4 nuns in the orphanage are Genestella, and she teaches the orphans self-defense. Ayato takes in the surroundings of the building through the window and notices a greenhouse. Teresa explains that the greenhouse used to be the dueling place of one of the Genestella children. Julius's mode changes. She gets out of her chair and excuses herself. Ayato goes after Julius, and while they're walking on the street, Julius tells Ayato about her plans to save her country from the hands of the Integration Enterprise Foundation by winning the grips. A tinted car passes by, and Julius gasps after recognizing the girl in it. After standing in shock for a few seconds, Julius charges in the direction of the tinted car like a mad bull. Julius leads Ayato through the snowy forest to link up with Ofelia, an old friend. Ofelia turns to Julius and asks Julius why she keeps trying to involve herself with her. Julius insists that Ofelia does not belong in the villain world, but Ofelia calmly asks Julius to butt off from her destiny. Julius suddenly challenges Ofelia to duel and promises to defeat her, but Ofelia doesn't move an inch to dissolve Julius's fire attack. A good number of shadow arms glide through the sky behind Ofelia and crush Julius's fire knives. Julius tries to attack again with a bigger fireball ball, but Ofelia absorbs the fire with her energy and creates a monstrous arm that grabs Julius and knocks her to the ground. Ayato rushes to save Julius, and Ofelia threatens Ayato to leave if he doesn't want to end up unalive, as she intends to do to Julius. Ayato pulls out his Servaresta to counter the spiraling shadow hands Ofelia sent towards him. Ofelia traps Ayato and Julius in a small dome before controlling a large shadow-like hand above them. Ayato closes his eyes in acceptance, but Gustave Malraux suddenly walks into the scene and points out that he has been hired to take Ayato and Julius out. Ophelia's boss rings her and orders her to go back into the laboratory, while Gustave Malraux finishes up Ayato. Gustave Malraux introduces his chimeras into the scene, and Ayato pulls his weak self from the ground in preparation for a fight. After sustaining a direct hit from one of the chimeras, Ayato uses a special sword style to cut through the second. Ayato panics over not being able to dodge the last standing chimera's attack, but Claudia swoops in and cuts off its heads. Claudia turns to Gustave Malraux, but Gustave Malraux disappears from the scene in cowardice. Ayato slumps, and Claudia begins calling out his name in fear. Ayato wakes up from the horrid visions during his blackout to find Kirin and Saya tucked beside him and snoring lightly. Julius walks into the room and informs Ayato that he has been asleep for 3 days before thanking Ayato for saving her. After returning the gesture, Ayato asks Julius to fill him in on the history between Julius and Ofelia. Julius pulls out her embroidered handkerchief with a frown, and Ayato instantly connects the dots. Julius confirms his suspicions that Ofelia was her best friend, who she told him he had given her the embroidered handkerchief. When Julius continues that Ofelia used to be full of life and against conflicts, Ayato asks what had come over her 3 days ago. Julius explains that Ofelia was born originally as a non-Genestella, but the Integrated Enterprise Foundation took her as collateral of the orphanage debt and appointed the head of the Tenorio faction of Alicante Academy, popularly known as Magnum Opus, to perform gruesome experiments on her. Julius continues that after many trials, Magnum Opus successfully transformed Ofelia into the world's strongest Strega. Julius adds that the last time she met Ofelia in Asterisk, it was obvious that she had given up on life and accepted her cruel fate, and when she tried to convince her otherwise by fighting her, Ofelia knocked the J out of her name. Julius apologizes for dragging Ayato into her drama before asking him to stay out of it and allow her to teach her friend how to be human again. Julius calls the attention of the girls pretending to be asleep on Ayato's legs to give an update about the doubled protection of them and the country. Flora barges into the room to report the invasion of flying chimeras all over the country. Julius immediately asks about the state of the orphanage, and Flora informs her that the appointed guards of the orphanage had gone to help the main city. Julius punches the table in annoyance and points out that Gustave plans to keep the guards occupied in the city and force Ayato and her to walk into an ambush while protecting the exposed orphanage. Julius fears that if she refuses to go to the orphanage, Gustave will not hesitate to wipe it out of existence. When Julius declares that she will sort things out on her own, the others volunteer to join her. After a bit of persuasion, Julius comes up with a plan. Julius carries Ayato to meet up with Gustav in a random street and demands to know if the orphanage is untouched. Gustav assures her the orphanage is safe before summoning a multiple-headed Hydra. After one of the Hydra heads blasts Ayato and Julius, Gustav cowardly excuses himself from the scene. Julius blindly tries to follow Gustav, but one of the Hydra's heads shoots a beam of fire at her. Luckily for her, Ayato shuts the Hydra's mouth and blocks the other attack attempts on Julius. Julius apologizes to Ayato for her recklessness, and the team of two decides they must defeat the Hydra before it enters the city. A few seconds after Ayato convinces Julius to leave the Hydra to him and focus on evacuating the citizens, Claudia is seen in a getaway car talking to a man over a voice call. When three Hydra heads send beam blasts at Ayato, Ayato blocks them all with a single swing of his sword. He leaps into the air, cuts off one of the Hydra heads, and runs along the body of the Hydra. Ayato becomes distracted after witnessing the Hydra regenerating its lost head and gets saved by Saya's snipers when three Hydra heads try to turn him into their dinner. Ayato stands on a roof to discuss a plan he cooked up. He informs Saya that the only way to defeat the Hydra is to cut off the main head and every other head before they get the chance to regenerate. Saya agrees to assist Ayato, and Ayato leaps into the sky to begin his cutting game. In a split of an eye, Ayato and Saya collectively cut down 4 Hydra heads. The main head goes berserk and tries to fry Ayato with its beam blast, but Ayato slices through the beam and cuts down the regenerated heads. The Hydra begins increasing its regeneration speed and blasting more fire beams at Ayato. Ayato refuses to back down and leaps into the air to stab the last head. The head tosses him out of its skin and rains multiple fire beams on Ayato. While Ayato avoids the beams, the rest of the heads regenerate and join the fire rain production, and Julius floats into the scene. She engulfs the Hydra in hot flames, and Ayato elongates his sword before using it to slice off all 6 heads at once. After realizing that Ayato and his friends have destroyed his Hydra, Gustav tries to escape with courtesy, but is surprised to see Kirin walking toward him with a sword. When Gustav tries to summon another set of chimeras, Kirin disappears to his back and knocks the consciousness out of him. On the other hand, Claudia links up with her father, who claims to be in charge of the attack. The man begins begging Claudia not to participate in the Grip's Festa to get her wish granted, but Claudia refuses and thanks him for his attempts to protect her. The following morning, before Julius and her friends get into their designated car, Julius promises her brother that she will win the Grip's Festa and bring more power to the royal family of Liesl. Julius asks her brother for his support, and Jolbert assures her that if she wins the Grip's Festa, he will stop being the Foundation's puppet and stand up for the citizens of Liesl. Ayato suddenly receives a call from Madiath, who informs him that they have located his long-lost sister. Madiath accompanies Ayato to a lab where his sister has been kept for 5 years due to her unexplainable coma. Ayato points out that his sister must have put herself in a coma for a reason. Ayato asks if Haruka will be in danger if she remains in her current state, and Madiath assures him that according to the doctor, if nothing changes, she will most likely outlive him. While Ayato lets his mind wander around his sister, a crazy-looking girl with psychotic hair approaches him and claims to know how to treat Haruka. In confusion, Ayato asks the maniac who she is, and the maniac introduces herself as Hilda Jane Rowlands, the head of the Tenorio faction of Alicante Academy and popularly known as Magnum Opus. In the student council president's office, Claudia apologizes for her father's actions. She explains that her father was trying to avoid his boss's wrath, aka Ginga, on her if she pushes through with the grips. Julius points out that making an enemy out of Ginga is equivalent to making an enemy of Saidukan, but Claudia firmly insists that she is willing to go against Ginga to get her wish. With their respective wishes in mind, the rest of the group agrees to join forces and win the Grips Festa at all costs.